My sister's boyfriend looked me dead in the eye at the dinner table and asked if I was still unemployed. The room went silent. My sister covered her mouth to hide a giggle, but her eyes were dancing with malicious delight. My father kicked me under the table, shooting me a look that warned me not to embarrass the family. So I sat there. I let them talk. I let them laugh. I let this man brag about his startup and how he was going to change the world. He had no idea that the unemployed woman sitting across from him was actually the silent partner in the venture capital firm he was desperate to impress. He did not know that with one text message, I could freeze his funding and end his career before it even started. And when he finally mentioned the name of my firm, I didn't say a word. I just pulled out my phone, looked him in the eye, and sent the text that turned his face pale. Before I tell you how I humbled an arrogant tech bro and reclaimed my dignity, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who turned out to be the greatest of all time. My name is Nia, and I am speaking to you from my penthouse overlooking the Atlanta skyline. From this height, the city looks like a circuit board of lights, silent and powerful. It is a stark contrast to the noise and chaos of my parents' dining room last Sunday. That was where the illusion finally shattered. You see, in the Jenkins household, there were always two roles. There was my sister Jasmine, the golden child, loud and demanding, who measured success by how many logos were visible on her handbag. And then there was me, Nia, the quiet one. The one who quit a stable banking job 2 years ago to pursue something my parents called a pipe dream, and I called building an empire. To them, silence meant failure. They did not understand that real wealth moves in silence. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration of Brad's new app launch. Brad is Jasmine's boyfriend, a man who wears his confidence like a cheap cologne that enters the room before he does. He drove up in a rented Tesla, walked into my parents' modest home, and immediately began scanning the room to see who he could impress. My mother Joyce was fluttering around him, taking his coat as if it were made of spun gold. "Oh, Brad," she said, "we are so honored you could make time for us simple folks." It was embarrassing. It was the kind of deep-seated insecurity that made my stomach turn. They looked at his white skin and his tech buzzwords and saw a savior. They looked at my simple silk blouse and my quiet demeanor and saw a charity case. We sat down to eat, and for the first 20 minutes the conversation was a monologue. Brad spoke about artificial intelligence, blockchain, and synergy. He used words that meant nothing to my parents, but they nodded along like bobbleheads desperate to be part of his world. Jasmine sat next to him, beaming occasionally, touching his arm to remind everyone that she was the chosen one. She looked at me across the table, her eyes scanning my outfit. I could hear her thoughts. She saw no jewelry, no designer logos, just a plain black top. She did not know the silk was vintage Armani, and the watch hidden under my sleeve was a Patek Philippe worth more than Brad's car. Then came the moment that shifted the atmosphere. Brad stopped mid-sentence, pointed his fork at me, and delivered the line that started the war. "So, Nia," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity, "Jasmine tells me you are still finding yourself. You are still unemployed, right?" The clatter of silverware stopped. My mother froze. Jasmine let out a short, sharp laugh like a bark, and then covered her mouth. It wasn't just a question. It was a public execution of my character. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame, but from a cold, simmering rage. I looked at my father, Otis, hoping for defense, hoping he would say that his daughter was intelligent, capable, and worthy of respect regardless of her job title. Instead, he cleared his throat, looked down at his plate, and muttered, "Nia, don't make a face. Brad is just trying to help. Listen to him. He is a CEO." That was the trigger. That was the moment the daughter they thought they knew disappeared, and the woman I actually am decided to step into the light. I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the irony. A CEO. I looked at Brad, really looked at him, and saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the way his leg was bouncing nervously under the table. I saw the desperation of a man whose company was burning cash faster than he could print it. He thought he was sitting with a failure. He had no idea he was insulting the only person in the room who could save him. To understand the depth of my family's delusion, you have to understand the entrance Brad made that evening. An hour before the dinner that would seal his fate, a white Tesla Model S slid into the driveway. My father Otis watched from the living room window, parting the curtains with trembling hands, as if he were witnessing the arrival of a diplomat. He turned to my mother and whispered that this was what success looked like. I didn't have the heart to tell him that I saw the Hertz rental barcode sticker on the rear bumper as the car turned in. I knew for a fact that Brad's credit score wouldn't allow him to lease a bicycle, let alone a luxury electric vehicle. But in my parents' eyes, the car was a chariot, and Brad was Caesar, coming to inspect the provinces. He stepped out of the car wearing the standard uniform of the Silicon Valley pretender. A fleece vest over a button-down shirt, dark jeans, and all-birds sneakers. He adjusted his glasses, looked at our modest two-story brick house, and gave a nod that felt less like appreciation and more like an appraisal of low-income housing. My mother, Joyce, didn't wait for him to knock. She flung the front door open before he was even halfway up the walk. Her apron was gone, replaced by her Sunday best, and she had forced a smile so wide it looked painful. "Welcome home, son," she called out. The word son stung. I had been paying their mortgage anonymously for 3 years through a shell company, yet I was treated like a tenant. Brad, a man they had met 5 times, was family. Brad walked in bringing a gust of cool air and expensive, overpowering cologne with him. He didn't hug my mother. He offered her a firm, two-handed handshake, the kind a politician gives to a constituent. "Joyce, you look fantastic," he said, his voice loud and performative. "And the house, it has such a cozy, lived-in charm. It really speaks to the resilience of this neighborhood." My mother beamed, missing the backhanded nature of the compliment entirely. She ushered him into the kitchen, where the air was thick with the savory scent of roasted chicken, collard greens, and cornbread. These were recipes passed down from my great-grandmother, dishes that represented survival and love. Brad stopped in the doorway and took a deep, exaggerated inhale through his nose. "Wow," he said, turning to my father. "That is quite an aroma. It is so authentic. I love getting a taste of real urban ethnic cuisine. It makes me feel so connected to the grassroots." I stood by the refrigerator, gripping my water glass tight enough to leave fingerprints. He was talking about our family dinner as if it were a safari exhibit. He categorized our heritage as a novelty to be consumed. I waited for my father, a man who had worked 40 years at the post office and marched for civil rights, to correct him. I waited for him to say that this was just dinner, not a cultural field trip. Instead, Otis clapped Brad on the shoulder and laughed. "Only the best for our CEO, right? Joyce spent all day making sure it was up to your standards. We know you are used to that fancy food in the city, but we wanted to give you something real." Brad smiled, that tight, benevolent smile of a colonizer accepting a gift from the natives. "I appreciate it, Otis," he said. "It is good for me to step out of my bubble and see how the other half lives. It keeps me humble." That was the dynamic. They worshipped him for descending from his imaginary throne to eat our food, and he basked in their adoration, convinced he was doing us a favor just by existing in our space. He sat at the head of the table without being asked, displacing my father, who happily took a seat to the side. As Brad spread his napkin over his lap, he looked at me for the first time since entering. "Hey, Nia," he said, not bothering to stand up. "I didn't see you there in the corner. You are blending in with the shadows today." I just smiled and took a sip of my water. I wasn't blending in. I was observing, and I was already calculating the cost of his destruction. If Brad was the king of this delusional little kingdom, my sister Jasmine was the court jester, desperate to be mistaken for a queen. As soon as he stepped fully into the living room, she was on him. She wrapped her arm through his with a possessiveness that screamed insecurity, leaning her head on his shoulder, as if she could not physically support her own weight without his validation. She was wearing a dress that was too tight, too bright, and covered in logos that were just slightly off-center. It was the uniform of someone who thinks wealth screams, when in reality it whispers. To Jasmine, if a garment did not have a giant gold buckle or a brand name plastered across the chest in neon thread, it was worthless. She looked at me standing by the window, comfortably dressed in a charcoal silk two-piece set, and let out a dramatic, theatrical sigh. "Oh, Nia," she said, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet tone she used when she wanted to insult me in front of an audience. "Did you forget we were having company? You are still in your pajamas." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. The set I was wearing was from a boutique in Milan, made of 100% mulberry silk, and cost more than her entire wardrobe combined. It was the definition of quiet luxury, a concept Jasmine would never understand, because she was too busy being loud. "It is loungewear, Jasmine," I said calmly. "It is comfortable." She laughed a sharp artificial sound and looked up at Brad for approval. "Comfortable is code for gave up, isn't it, Brad? See, this is why you are still single, Nia. Men like a woman who puts in effort, a woman who looks like a prize, not someone who just rolled out of bed to check the mail." She lifted her wrist, flashing a bracelet that sparkled aggressively under the living room lights. It looked like glass and cubic zirconia, but she held it up like it was the Hope Diamond. "Brad bought me this yesterday," she announced to the room, though her eyes were locked on mine. "We were at the mall and he just insisted. He said, 'Baby, nothing is too good for you.' That is what it is like when a man values you, Nia. He wants to decorate you." My mother nodded from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Listen to your sister Nia. She knows what is in style. She is trying to help you modernize. You look so drab in that gray thing." Jasmine walked over to me, the cheap heels of her shoes clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. She reached out and fingered the fabric of my blouse with disdain, unaware she was touching silk that required dry cleaning by specialists only. "You know, I could take you shopping," she offered, her voice full of mock charity. "Brad gave me a supplementary card for emergencies. I could help you find something that doesn't look so depressingly practical. Maybe then you could attract a man with actual potential, instead of scaring them away with this whole tired librarian vibe. You need to dress for the job you want, Nia. And right now, you are dressing like you want to be invisible." I gently removed her hand from my sleeve, dusting off the spot where she had touched me, as if she had left a smudge of dirt. I didn't tell her that the job I wanted was the one I already had. I didn't tell her that the only reason Brad had a supplementary card to give her was because the bank hadn't processed his overdraft fees yet. I just smiled a small, tight smile. "Thank you for the advice, Jasmine," I said. "I will keep that in mind." She smirked, satisfied that she had put me in my place, and trotted back to Brad's side, ready to be his accessory for dinner. The transition to the dining table was a study in hierarchy. Brad took the seat at the head of the table, the spot my father had occupied for 30 years. Otis didn't even blink. He simply shuffled to the chair on the left, happy to cede his authority to the man he believed was the future of our family. As the roast chicken was carved and served, the silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of silverware scraping against porcelain. I focused on my meal, hoping to get through this dinner with my dignity intact. But Brad had other plans. He wasn't content with just occupying our space. He needed to dominate the conversation. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, took a sip of wine that was far too expensive for his budget, and turned his gaze directly onto me. The air in the room shifted. It was an ambush. "So, Nia," he began, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who loves the sound of his own thoughts. "Let's pivot to something important. Your trajectory. Jasmine mentioned you have been out of the corporate game for 2 years now? In the tech world, that is a lifetime. That is practically an era. You are becoming obsolete data in a high-speed processor." I placed my fork down gently. "I am taking some time to evaluate my options," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Brad chuckled, shaking his head, as if I were a naive child trying to explain quantum physics. "Evaluate options. That is a very quaint way to put it. But let's be real. The market doesn't wait for evaluations. At Vision Flow, we are moving at the speed of thought. We are integrating blockchain protocols with generative AI to create a synergistic paradigm shift in the consumer ecosystem. My parents nodded vigorously. They had no idea what a blockchain was. They probably thought it was a type of jewelry. But because Brad said it with conviction, they treated it like gospel. Exactly, my mother chimed in. Brad is on the cutting edge, Nia. He understands how the world works. You could learn so much from him if you just put your pride aside. Brad leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, invading my personal space. Look, I am a generous guy. I believe in lifting up the community. I hate to see potential wasted, even if that potential is dormant. I was thinking Vision Flow is scaling up rapidly. We have a lot of moving parts. We need someone to handle the logistics. He paused for dramatic effect, waiting for me to ask what the position was. I remained silent, staring at him. I could bring you on, he continued, undeterred by my lack of enthusiasm. It wouldn't be a strategic role, obviously. You lack the bandwidth for that. But we need a director of first impressions. Basically, someone to manage the front desk, organize the coffee orders for the developers, make sure the break room is stocked with kombucha. It is a vital part of the culture. My father's face lit up. That sounds wonderful, Brad. Nia, did you hear that? A job at a tech company. It is an internship technically, Brad corrected quickly. Unpaid for the first 6 months, of course. We pour all our capital back into the R&D. But the exposure you would get. Being in the same room as visionaries, you can't put a price tag on that. It would clean up that gap in your resume nicely. It stops you from looking like a liability. I looked at this man who was offering me a job fetching coffee at a company that my analysts had flagged as a high-risk investment 3 days ago. I knew his burn rate. I knew his user retention numbers were inflated. And here he was offering me exposure, as if it were a currency I could spend. I appreciate the offer, Brad. I said, my voice steady though my blood was boiling. But I don't think I am the right fit for your culture. Brad leaned back, his smile turning into a sneer. Suit yourself. I try to throw you a lifeline and you let your ego get in the way. This is why you are stuck, Nia. You think you are too good for the grind. Jasmine giggled, sipping her wine. She is just intimidated, babe. She knows she couldn't handle the fast pace. She prefers doing whatever it is she does all day. Probably sleeping. I picked up my knife and fork, slicing into the chicken with precision. I didn't tell him that the grind he worshipped was something I had mastered and transcended years ago. I didn't tell him that exposure doesn't pay bills, but equity does. I simply ate, letting him believe he had won the round. Because the higher he climbed in his own mind, the further he would fall when I finally pulled the rug out from under him. I opened my mouth to decline the offer to tell Brad that I did not need his charity or his pity. I wanted to tell him that my hourly consultation rate was higher than what he paid his lead developers. But the words never made it past my lips. The sound of my father's palm slamming against the mahogany table cracked like a whip, silencing the room instantly. It was a sound that reverted me to a frightened child, freezing me in place. Otis was glaring at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of embarrassment and rage that I had not seen directed at me in years. The vein in his forehead was throbbing. Stop it right there, Nia, he barked, his voice shaking with anger. I will not sit here and watch you disrespect a guest in my home. I will not watch you throw away an opportunity because of your stubborn, foolish pride. I looked at him, stunned. Dad, he is insulting me, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. He is offering me an internship. I have a master's degree in finance. He is offering you a job, Otis shouted, cutting me off. Do you know how many people would kill to work for a CEO in this economy? You have been out of work for 2 years. 2 years, Nia. We have watched you drift doing nothing, while your sister builds a life. And now when a successful man reaches down to pull you up, you think you are too good to grab his hand. You think you are too good to answer a phone. My mother. Joyce didn't shout. Her method of destruction was far more subtle and far more painful. She didn't touch her food, she just shook her head, looking at me with a profound, weary disappointment that hit harder than any physical blow. "Your father is right," she said softly. "Why can't you just be grateful for once? Look at your sister. Look at Jasmine." We all looked at Jasmine. She preened under the attention, straightening her posture and giving Brad a sympathetic look as if to say, "I am sorry about her." "She is 3 years younger than you, Nia," my mother continued. "But she has vision. She understands how the world works. She knows how to stand by a successful man. She knows how to be part of a team. You have always been so difficult, so solitary. You walk around with your nose in the air, but what do you have to show for it? No husband, no career, just an empty apartment and a bad attitude. It is why you are alone, Nia. Because you don't know how to let people help you." The room felt incredibly small. The air was sucked out of it. I looked at Otis, a man for whom I had secretly paid off the mortgage 3 years ago so he could retire early. I looked at Joyce, whose expensive arthritis medication was paid for by a direct debit from my holding company every month. They didn't know. They saw a failure because they measured success by proximity to a white man in a vest. I realized then that I was completely alone at that table. It wasn't 3 against 1. It was their fantasy against my reality. They preferred the comfortable lie of my failure over the complicated truth of my success, because my failure allowed them to feel superior. My success would require them to admit they had underestimated me my entire life. I took a slow breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I looked at my father, whose face was still red with exertion. I looked at my mother, whose eyes were wet with performative tears, and I decided to let them keep their narrative for 1 more hour. "I understand," I said, my voice void of any emotion. "I apologize. I didn't mean to be ungrateful." Brad smirked, leaning back in his chair, satisfied that the alpha male of the house had put the unruly female in check. "Good," he said. "I accept your apology. We can discuss the internship start date later." I nodded, picking up my fork. But inside, the bridge had been burned. They wanted me to be small. They wanted me to be the help. So I would play the part right up until the moment I bought the theater and fired the cast. The arrival of the check is always the ultimate truth serum in any social interaction. It strips away the pretense of conversation and reduces everything to cold, hard numbers. When the waiter finally placed the black leather folder in the center of the table, the mood shifted instantly. The total was likely close to $800 given the 3 bottles of vintage Cabernet Brad had ordered without looking at the price list. He had spent the last 2 hours acting like a billionaire, but when the bill arrived, the performance took a predictable, pathetic turn. Brad reached for the folder with a flourish, making a show of being the provider. He opened it, nodded approvingly at the total as if it were pocket change, and then reached for his back pocket. His brow furrowed. He patted his chest pocket, then his side pockets. The pantomime was so bad it was almost insulted. It was the classic "I forgot my wallet" routine executed with the grace of a toddler, lying about eating a cookie. "Oh, shoot," Brad muttered, shaking his head with a rueful smile. "I must have left my wallet in the center console of the Tesla. I was so focused on getting inside to see you all, I just completely spaced." My father, ever the loyal servant, immediately reached for his own battered leather wallet. "Don't worry about it, Brad. I have got it. You are our guest." "No, no, Otis. I insist," Brad said, holding up a hand to stop him, though I noticed he made no move to actually get up and retrieve his wallet from the car. "I can run out and grab it. It will just take a minute. Unless—" He let the word hang in the air, his eyes sliding over to me. A slow, cruel smirk played on his lips. "I would ask Nia to cover it just to keep things moving," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I know things are tight. I don't want to cause an overdraft situation. We all know those unemployment checks barely cover rent, let alone a meal like this." The table went quiet. He had managed to insult my financial status and assert his dominance in one breath. He was daring me to be humiliated. My mother, who had been sipping her coffee, set her cup down with a sharp clink. She looked at Brad, then turned her gaze on me. It wasn't a look of sympathy, it was a look of expectation. Nia, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Pay the bill. I blinked, looking at her. You want me to pay? I asked, keeping my voice level. After he just made a joke about me being broke. Don't be dramatic, my father chimed in, his hand still hovering over his own wallet. Brad forgot his wallet. It happens to the best of us. You have savings, Nia. We know you have money put away from your old job. Use it. Consider it a gift. A gift, I repeated, genuinely fascinated by their logic. Yes, a gift, my mother snapped. A welcome gift for your brother-in-law. Show him that you are happy he is part of the family. Show him that you support your sister. Stop hoarding your money and do something nice for once. Prove to us that you are not just bitter and jealous. The audacity was breathtaking. They were asking the unemployed daughter to cover an $800 dinner for the rich CEO, framing it as a test of my loyalty. If I refused, I was cheap and jealous. If I paid, I was a doormat. They thought they had trapped me. They thought I would crumble under the pressure or explode in anger. Brad watched me, his eyes twinkling with amusement. He thought he had checkmated me. He thought I would have to admit I couldn't afford it, or begrudgingly pay with a debit card that would be declined. I looked at the black folder sitting on the white tablecloth. I looked at my parents, who were glaring at me with judgment. And I looked at Brad, the man who claimed to be a visionary, but couldn't cover a dinner check. Fine, I said softly. I will take care of it. I reached for my purse, not the cheap one Jasmine thought I owned, but a custom leather piece lined with silk. I saw Brad exchange a look with Jasmine, a look that said, "Watch this, she is going to count out crumpled bills." They were ready to laugh. They had no idea I was about to silence them with a piece of plastic that carried more weight than Brad's entire existence. The walk to the server station felt like a quiet procession towards a secret coronation. Behind me, the laughter from my family's table continued, fueled by the wine I was about to pay for. Brad was likely recounting another tale of his imaginary conquests in the tech world, unaware that the real power in the room was walking away from him. I approached the counter where our waiter, a young man named Marcus, who had spent the entire evening fawning over Brad's rented Tesla key fob, was waiting with a look of mild impatience. He sighed audibly as I approached, his body language screaming that he expected a complication. He probably anticipated a declined debit card or a request to split the payment across 3 different accounts to scrape together the funds. One check, he said flatly, not even bothering to make eye contact. He held out his hand, palm open, expecting a worn piece of plastic. One check. I confirmed, my voice barely above a whisper. I reached into the inner pocket of my clutch, bypassing the standard platinum cards that most people consider status symbols. Those were for groceries. For this, I needed the heavy artillery. I pulled out the Centurion card, the American Express Black Card. It is made of anodized titanium, cold to the touch, and significantly heavier than a standard credit card. It is the kind of object that carries a mythos, available only by invitation to those who spend millions. I dropped the card into Marcus's hand. The reaction was physical. As the weight of the metal hit his palm, his eyebrows shot up. He looked down, confused for a split second, and then his eyes widened in genuine shock. He froze. He looked at the card, then up at me, then back at the card. The boredom vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden frantic realization that he had completely misjudged the hierarchy of his customers. He had been serving the jester while ignoring the queen. "Miss Jenkins," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. He straightened his posture immediately, buttoning his vest with a nervous hand. I didn't realize. If I had known." I leaned in closer, cutting off his apology with a sharp look. I raised a single finger to my lips. "Do not make a scene," I whispered, my tone icy and commanding. "Just run the card, 20% tip, and not a word to the table." He nodded vigorously, looking terrified. "Yes, ma'am. Of course, ma'am. Right away." He handled the card as if it were a religious artifact, inserting it into the reader with trembling fingers. The transaction approved instantly. There are no preset spending limits on a Centurion card. I could have bought the restaurant if I wanted to. He handed it back to me with both hands, offering the receipt pen like a peace offering. "Thank you, Ms. Jenkins," he said, his voice hushed and reverent. "Is there anything else I can get you? A private car? Anything at all?" "No," I said, slipping the Titan back into the darkness of my bag. "Just the receipt." I walked back to the table, my expression unchanged. The waiter watched me go, his eyes wide, likely replaying every interaction he had with me that night and cringing. I sat down, and the bubble of ignorance around my family remained perfectly intact. "Did it go through?" my mother asked, her voice laced with doubt. "Or do we need to call your father's bank?" "It is taken care of," I said simply. Brad chuckled, patting his stomach. "Good girl. It is nice to see you stepping up. Maybe this internship will help you learn the value of $1. I picked up my water glass, hiding a smile. I knew the value of $1. I also knew that I had just spent more on their dinner than Brad had in his bank account. And the silence of that knowledge was the most expensive thing on the menu. The cool night air outside the restaurant did nothing to dampen Brad's inflated ego. If anything, the fact that he had just enjoyed a 5-star meal without spending a dime had energized him. He stood by the valet stand, bouncing on the balls of his feet, lecturing my father on the importance of aggressive expansion in the current market. Otis listened intently, nodding as if he were receiving the 10 Commandments, while my mother fussed over Jasmine's coat. I stood slightly apart from them, watching the performance with the detachment of a scientist observing a lab rat running through a maze it did not know was rigged. As the valet pulled up in the white Tesla, Brad clapped his hands together, signaling the end of his sermon. "Well, folks, it has been real. We need to get back. Big day tomorrow. We are pivoting the entire back-end architecture. Huge moves. I decided to test the waters one last time. I wanted to see if there was any substance beneath the buzzwords, any actual knowledge behind the facade." I stepped forward, blocking his path to the driver's side door just for a moment. "Brad," I said, keeping my voice casual, "I was reading about the liquidity crunch in the tech sector this morning. With interest rates where they are, I was wondering about your burn rate. How many months of runway does Vision Flow actually have left before you need a Series B injection?" The question was precise. It was technical. It was the kind of question a seasoned investor asks before writing a check or walking away. For a split second, I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. His jaw tightened. He knew I was speaking a language he was barely fluent in. But then the arrogance washed back over him like a tide. He laughed a loud, dismissive bark that made Jasmine giggle on cue. "Wow, listen to you," he said, shaking his head. "You read a couple of articles on Bloomberg, and suddenly you are an analyst." "That is cute, Nia. Really. But burn rate isn't just a number. It is a mindset. We are in growth mode. We don't worry about runway. We build the plane while we fly it." Jasmine hooked her arm through his, leaning in to whisper loud enough for me to hear. "She is just trying to sound smart, babe. She probably doesn't even know what liquidity means. She thinks it has to do with water." Brad grinned, opening the car door for her. "Yeah, well, nice try, Nia. My advice? Don't worry about my runway. Worry about your own. You have been unemployed for 2 years. That is a lot of runway you have burned through doing absolutely nothing. Focus on that receptionist gig. I will put in a good word for you, but you have to promise not to use big words you don't understand. It scares the clients." My parents laughed along with him, a nervous, eager sound. "Good night, Nia," my mother said, kissing my cheek quickly. "Listen to Brad. He knows what he is talking about. Drive safe, you two." I watched them pile into the car. The Tesla hummed to life and pulled away, their laughter fading into the traffic of the city. My parents got into their modest sedan a moment later, waving at me to get to my own car, assuming I was parked around the corner in some beat-up compact. I stood there on the curb until both cars were out of sight, letting the silence settle around me. Only then did I lift my hand and make a small, subtle gesture. From the shadows of the parking lot, a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows pulled up smoothly to the curb. The back door opened, and Sebastian, my driver and security detail for the past 2 years, stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, in an impeccable suit, the kind of professional who knew everything, but said nothing. "Good evening, Ms. Jenkins," he said, holding the door open. "Home." I looked at the empty street where my family had just vanished, leaving me behind without a second thought. "No, Sebastian," I said, sliding into the leather interior that smelled of success and solitude. "Take me to the office. I need to review the Aurora Capital files. I have a meeting on Monday that I need to prepare for." As the heavy door clicked shut, sealing me off from the noise of the street, I pulled up the Vision Flow dossier on my tablet. Brad told me to worry about my runway. He had no idea I was about to become the air traffic controller who grounded his entire fleet. 3 hours later, the contrast between the parking lot and my reality could not have been starker. I sat in my home office surrounded by the glow of three 40-inch monitors. The Atlanta skyline twinkled silently behind me through the floor-to-ceiling glass, but my focus was entirely on the faces on the center screen. It was 9 p.m. locally, but it was morning in Singapore, and the negotiation for the Series A funding of a fintech startup was reaching its critical point. I wasn't the silent girl at the dinner table anymore. Here I was, the managing partner of Aurora Capital. "Mr. Tan," I said, my voice projecting an authority that would have shocked my father. "Your valuation is based on projected growth in the Malaysian market, but your regulatory approval is still pending. Aurora is willing to lead the round at 15 million, but we want a board seat and 20% equity. That is the offer. You have until the market opens to decide." On the screen, the CEO of the startup nodded respectfully. He didn't see a girl in pajamas or a failure. He saw a shark. "We understand, Ms. Jenkins," he said. "We are honored by the offer." I ended the call and leaned back in my Herman Miller chair, exhaling a long breath. This was who I was. I moved millions of dollars with a sentence. I shaped the future of companies. I took a sip of sparkling water, feeling the adrenaline of the deal settle into a hum of satisfaction. Then my personal cell phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. It wasn't the encrypted work phone. It was the family line. The screen lit up with the word "Mom." The ringtone felt like an intrusion, a jarring reminder of the other life I was living. I picked it up. "Hello, Mom." Nia. Her voice came through sharp and demanding, stripped of the sweetness she used for Brad. "I need you over here first thing tomorrow morning. By 8 o'clock. I glanced at my calendar on the left screen. I had a portfolio review at 9. "I have plans in the morning, Mom," I said, careful not to say work. "Plans," she scoffed. "Plans to do what? Sleep in, watch TV. Listen, Jasmine is having her engagement party here on Saturday. The house is a mess. I need the baseboards scrubbed, the silver polished, and the guest bathroom deep cleaned. You know how meticulous Brad's family is. We can't have them thinking we live in squalor." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Mom, why don't you hire a cleaning service? I can send you the money." "Oh, stop it," she snapped. "Why would I pay a stranger when I have a daughter who sits at home all day? Besides, it is the least you can do. Jasmine is so stressed with the planning. She is working so hard. You need to contribute to this family, Nia. You can't just take and take." The irony was so thick, it nearly choked me. I had just negotiated a $15 million deal, and my mother was ordering me to scrub baseboards because she thought I was a leech. I looked at the contract on my screen, then at the phone. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. "I will be there." "Good," she said, and hung up without a goodbye. I set the phone down. I could have told her no. I could have told her everything right then. But the trap wasn't ready yet. Brad was still climbing the ladder I had built for him. If I revealed myself now, it would just be a petty argument. I needed total destruction. So I would go. I would scrub their floors. I would play the Cinderella role one last time. Because when the clock struck 12, I wasn't going to lose a glass slipper. I was going to buy the whole kingdom. While I was downstairs performing the role of the dutiful, unemployed daughter scrubbing the kitchen floor until my knuckles were raw, Jasmine was upstairs conducting a raid. The hierarchy in our house was clear. I was the labor, and she was the management. She told Mom she needed to rest before her big night out with Brad's friends, claiming the stress of being a public figure on Instagram was exhausting. So while I inhaled the fumes of industrial cleaner, she drifted into my old bedroom, the guest room where I had left my things earlier that morning. I had arrived straight from a red-eye flight from New York the day before and hadn't fully unpacked my weekender bag. Tucked inside beneath a layer of gym clothes was my holy grail, a black Hermes Birkin 30 with gold hardware. It was an investment piece, an asset that appreciated in value faster than the stock market. I treated that bag with more respect than my parents treated me. I kept it in its dust bag stuffed with acid-free tissue paper to maintain its shape. To Jasmine, however, it was just an object to be consumed. I can reconstruct the scene perfectly, because I know my sister better than she knows herself. She would have rifled through my bag looking for cash or perhaps a receipt she could mock. When her hand brushed against the textured leather of the Birkin, she didn't recognize the grain of supreme quality. She pulled it out, holding it up to the light. I imagined she looked for a logo. She looked for the loud, tacky branding that defined her wardrobe. Finding none, she likely curled her lip in disgust. To a woman who worships labels, quiet luxury looks like poverty. She assumed it was a knockoff. She assumed I had bought it from a street vendor to pretend I was someone I wasn't. God, Nia, even your fake bags are boring, she probably whispered to the empty room. No logo. Who buys a bag with no logo? But Jasmine had a problem. She had a new dress for the club that night, a neon monstrosity that required a simple black accessory to ground it. Her own closet was full of bags that were falling apart, the cheap stitching fraying after 2 uses. She looked at my Birkin. In her mind, it was worthless, a throwaway item made of vegan leather, which is just a polite word for plastic. She didn't see the hand stitching. She didn't see the stamp of the artisan. She just saw a prop. She made the executive decision to liberate the bag from my possession. She dumped my contents out onto the bed, my iPad, my noise-canceling headphones, my portfolio, carelessly tossing them aside. She shoved her own items inside a cracked iPhone, a tube of sticky lip gloss, and a fake ID. She swung the $30,000 bag over her shoulder, checking her reflection in my dusty mirror. She probably thought she was doing the bag a favor by taking it out of its misery. She walked out of the room, banging the bag against the doorframe as she exited, scratching the hardware against the wood. Downstairs, I heard her heels clicking towards the door. "Bye, Mom." "Bye, Nia," she shouted, not even bothering to look into the kitchen where I was sweating. "Don't wait up. We are going to the VIP section tonight." I didn't look up from the bucket of soapy water. I didn't know yet that my sister had just walked out of the house carrying the equivalent of a down payment on a house on her shoulder, treating it like a $5 tote bag from a discount bin. The next morning, the difference in our lifestyles was painfully obvious. I had been up since 5 taking a conference call with London and reviewing market trends while drinking matcha. Jasmine, on the other hand, dragged herself into the kitchen at 11, wearing sunglasses indoors to hide the evidence of a night spent chasing status in dark rooms. She looked disheveled, smelling of stale perfume and regret. In her hand, swinging carelessly by its handle, was my bag. She didn't hand it to me. She dropped it onto the granite island where I was cutting fruit. The sound it made was heavy, a dull thud that made my stomach turn. "Here," she mumbled, reaching for a bottle of water. "Thanks for the loan. It is actually kind of small. I couldn't even fit my flats in there. Next time, buy something with more utility." I looked at the bag. My heart stopped. Across the front of the pristine black Togo leather was a jagged purple stain. It looked like red wine that had been allowed to sit and soak into the grain for hours. Worse, there was a deep white scratch running diagonally across the gold clasp, as if it had been dragged against a rough brick wall. I set my knife down slowly. "Jasmine," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "What is this?" "What is what?" she asked, unscrewing the water cap and taking a long gulp. "The stain," I said, pointing at the ruined leather. "And the scratch. You destroyed the bag." She lowered her sunglasses, squinting at the damage as if it were a speck of dust. "Oh, that," relaxed Nia. "It was crowded in the VIP section. Some guy spilled his Merlot. I wiped most of it off with a cocktail napkin. It is barely noticeable." Barely noticeable, I picked up the bag, feeling the texture of the ruined leather. The oils from the wine had already compromised the finish. "This is permanent damage, Jasmine. You can't just wipe this off." She laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Oh my God, you are so dramatic. It is just a bag, Nia, and it is not even a real one. Stop acting like I just defaced the Mona Lisa. It is a knockoff. What did you pay for it?" $50 at a flea market." I stared at her. She genuinely believed that. She was so blinded by her own ignorance that she couldn't tell the difference between a $30,000 investment piece and cheap plastic. "It is not a knockoff," I said, my voice tight. "Yeah, okay," she sneered, leaning against the counter. "Look, if you are going to cry about it, I will replace it. I am going to Walmart later to pick up some streamers for the party. I will grab you a tote bag. They have some cute ones with floral prints. It will probably be an upgrade from that boring black thing anyway." She patted my shoulder condescendingly. "Consider it an early birthday present. You need to lighten up, Naya. Material things aren't everything." She walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there with the ruined masterpiece in my hands. I looked at the scratch on the gold hardware. I could have demanded she pay me $30,000 right then. I could have shown her the receipt and watched her face crumble. But I didn't. I realized that the price of this bag was the price of my freedom. She had just given me the final reason I needed to sever ties completely. I gently placed the bag back in its dust cover. I would add the cost to the final invoice I was mentally preparing, and the interest rate was going to be astronomical. 2 hours after Jasmine left with my ruined bag, my phone rang again. I was sitting at my desk, deep in the forensic audit of Vision Flow's financials. The numbers on my screen were painting a grim picture of a company that was bleeding cash from self-inflicted wounds. There were exorbitant charges for client dinners that looked suspiciously like personal dates and travel expenses for conferences that didn't exist. I was just highlighting a line item for a luxury car rental when Brad's name flashed on my personal phone screen. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but my curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear the voice of the man whose financial ruin I was currently mapping out. I answered on speakerphone, keeping my eyes glued to the spreadsheet of his incompetence. "Hello, Brad," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He didn't bother with a greeting. "Nia, I need a favor, and honestly, it is more of an opportunity for you than a favor to me. I am in a bit of a jam." I waited. My office manager called out sick. He lied. I knew for a fact he didn't have an office manager because I was looking at his payroll, which consisted of 3 underpaid developers and himself. The cleaning crew also flaked. It is hard to find good help these days. Anyway, I have a massive meeting coming up. High-level investors. The place is a disaster. I need you to come down here and organize the filing cabinets. Maybe wipe down the conference table and grab some coffee for the break room. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the sheer volume of his audacity. He was asking me, a woman who managed an 8-figure portfolio, to come and be his janitor. "You want me to come clean your office?" I asked, just to hear him say it. "I want you to provide logistical support," he corrected, using a buzzword to dress up manual labor. "Look, I know you are just sitting at home. Mom told me you are still watching cartoons or whatever it is you do. This is a chance for you to see how a real startup operates from the ground floor. You can put it on your resume. Assistant to the CEO. I will even write you a recommendation letter if you do a good job." The condescension was so thick I could practically taste it. He truly believed my time had zero value. He thought he was doing me a kindness by letting me scrub his toilet. "Brad," I said, my voice cooling by 10 degrees. "I am not coming to clean your office. I am busy." "Busy?" He laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "Busy doing what, Nia? Organizing your sock drawer, rearranging your furniture?" Don't give me that. You have been unemployed for 2 years. You have nothing but time. I am offering you a way to be useful to the family, to contribute. Don't be selfish. I am not being selfish, I said. I am declining your offer to be your unpaid maid. Hire a cleaning service if it is that important. I can't trust strangers with my intellectual property, he snapped. The panic in his voice was leaking through. He couldn't afford a cleaning service. His credit cards were maxed out. He needed free labor because he was broke. Listen, Nia. If you don't come down here, I am going to have to tell Otis. I will tell him that when I reached out to give you a hand, you slapped it away. You know how much that will disappoint him? Do you really want to be the reason the family looks bad? Again, he was weaponizing my father's approval against me. It was a low tactic, but it was all he had left. I looked at the screen at the line item showing he had spent $5,000 on a custom ergonomic chair, while his rent was 2 months overdue. Tell him whatever you want, Brad, I said. But I am not coming. I have my own meetings to prepare for. Meetings? He scoffed. What with your therapist, fine. Stay in your hole. But when I close this deal and take the family to Paris, don't expect a ticket. You just talked yourself out of the inner circle. He hung up, slamming the phone down hard enough that I heard the crackle on the other end. I stared at the disconnected call, feeling a cold smile spread across my face. He was worried about a messy office for his big meeting. He had no idea that the person he just tried to bully into taking out his trash was the same person who was going to decide if his company lived or died on Monday morning. I turned back to my spreadsheet. I didn't need to clean his office. I was about to clean him out. The fallout from my refusal to be Brad's unpaid janitor was immediate and digital. In the modern age, family dysfunction does not stay behind closed doors. It is broadcast in high definition for the world to judge. I was sitting on my terrace reviewing the quarterly earnings of a biotech firm I held stock in when my personal phone began to buzz incessantly. It was not a call. It was a flood of notifications from the Jenkins Family Connect group chat, a digital space usually reserved for birthday wishes and prayer requests. Today, however, it was a public square for my execution. I opened the app and saw the catalyst. Jasmine had taken to social media. She had posted a selfie on Instagram, cross-posted to Facebook, where all our older relatives lurked. In the photo, she looked staged to perfection, messy bun glasses she didn't need sitting amidst a pile of papers in what was clearly the corner of Brad's disorganized office. The caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. It read, "So exhausted from building an empire from scratch. It is hard work, but someone has to do it. It just breaks my heart when you reach out a hand to family members who are struggling, offering them a chance to work and get back on their feet, only to be told that hard work is beneath them. I guess some people are content letting their parents foot the bill forever, praying for my sister to find her purpose. Hashtag boss babe, hashtag family first, hashtag enabler no more." The comments section was a shark tank. My cousin Tamika wrote SMH. "Some people just want a handout, Jazz. You are doing your best." My Aunt Sheila added, "A slothful hand makes for a poor life." Proverbs 10:4. We are praying for her spirit to be convicted. They were talking about me as if I were a drug addict or a criminal, simply because I refused to organize filing cabinets for a man who rented a Tesla to impress them. I watched the comments roll in, each one a brick in the wall they were building between us. I took screenshots of everything, not to dwell on the pain but to document the betrayal. Then the phone rang. The caller ID displayed Aunt Denise. Denise was the matriarch of judgment, a woman who had not worked a day since 1995 but had strong opinions on everyone else's career. I answered, expecting a lecture. "I got an ambush. Nia, she didn't even say hello. I just got off the phone with your mother. Is it true? Did you really refuse to help that nice young man, Brad? After everything he has done for this family?" I kept my voice calm. "He wanted me to clean his office, Aunt Denise. I declined. You declined," she repeated, her voice rising an octave. "Who do you think you are to decline work? You are sitting in that apartment. Your father probably pays for doing absolutely nothing with your life. and you turn up your nose at an opportunity. You are a disgrace, Nia. A disgrace to the Jenkins name. Your grandfather worked 2 jobs with a bad back, so we could have opportunities, and here you are, acting like a princess while your sister carries the weight of the world. I listened to her breathing heavily on the other end. She had no idea that the apartment my father pays for was a penthouse I bought with cash. She had no idea that the weight Jasmine was carrying was a counterfeit handbag I paid for. You are embarrassing us, Denise continued. The whole church is whispering about Otis's unemployed daughter. Fix this, Nia. Go down there, apologize to Brad, and scrub those floors if he asks you to. Or don't bother showing up to the reunion next month. We don't need that negative energy. She hung up before I could respond. I lowered the phone, looking at the black screen. They called me a disgrace. They called me lazy. They wanted me to scrub floors to earn my place in the family. I placed the phone gently on the glass table. I wasn't going to scrub floors, but I was definitely going to clean house. And when I was done, there wouldn't be a speck of their disrespect left. The digital harassment from my family continued well into the afternoon, but I had silenced my phone and retreated to the one place where emotions held no currency. My private office was located in a nondescript building downtown, a sanctuary of glass and steel where I orchestrated my real life. Waiting for me there was David, my head of due diligence and arguably the most dangerous man on my payroll. He didn't carry a gun, he carried information, and what he had waiting for me on his tablet was lethal. I sat down at my desk, the leather cool against my skin, and David didn't waste time with pleasantries. He slid the black folder across the polished mahogany surface. "It is worse than we thought," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "Vision flow isn't just struggling, Nia. It is a cadaver that hasn't realized it is dead yet." I opened the file. The first page was a summary of Brad's corporate accounts. The numbers were bathed in red ink. "He has 0 recurring revenue," David explained as I scanned the documents. "The client list he boasts about on LinkedIn. It is fabricated. Most of those companies have never heard of him. He lists partnerships with Microsoft and Google, but those are just standard free developer accounts available to anyone with an email address." I turned the page. The payroll records were even more damning. "He hasn't paid his 3 developers since April," David continued. "He keeps promising them equity in lieu of salary, claiming a massive funding round is imminent. 2 of them have already filed complaints with the labor board. But the real ticking time bomb is the tax situation. Brad has been withholding payroll taxes from their checks, but not remitting them to the IRS. He is using that money to lease the Tesla and pay for those dinners he treats your parents to. That is federal fraud, Nia. If the IRS looks at him sideways, he is going to prison." I looked at the bank statements. The company headquarters he bragged about was a WeWork co-working space, and his membership had been suspended last week for non-payment. He was currently running this global empire from a coffee shop with free Wi-Fi. "But here's the kicker," David said, tapping the final document in the stack. "He is desperate. He knows the walls are closing in. He has been shotgunning applications to every venture capital firm in the city for a lifeline." I looked down at the paper. It was a funding application. The cover letter was filled with the same buzzwords he had vomited at the dinner table. Synergy, paradigm shift, disruption. But the recipient line made me freeze. "He applied to us." I whispered, a smile slowly forming on my lips. "He sent this to the general inquiry inbox of Aurora Ventures at 3 a.m. this morning," David confirmed. "He is begging for a Series A injection of $2 million. He claims he has a proprietary algorithm that will revolutionize the industry." I laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. The man who told me I was too lazy to work, the man who tried to hire me as his unpaid janitor, was currently begging my company for the money to stay out of jail. He was asking the unemployed sister to save his life, he just didn't know it yet. "This is it, David," I said, closing the folder with a satisfying snap. "This is the leverage." David nodded. Do you want me to reject the application? We can send a standard denial letter within the hour. No, I said, standing up and walking to the window. Rejection is too easy. Rejection is private. I want this to be public. I want him to believe he has won. I want him to walk into the lion's den thinking he is the tamer. I turned back to David. Flag the application. Fast track it. Tell the intake team to schedule a pitch meeting for Monday morning. Tell him the managing partner is personally interested in his vision. David smiled. He knew exactly what I was doing. Consider it done. I looked out at the city. Brad wanted a seat at the table. He wanted to play with the big boys. I was going to give him exactly what he wanted. I was going to invite him into my world, and then I was going to show him why you never ever underestimate the quiet one in the room. The Sunday barbecue was a Jenkins family institution, a ritual of ribs, potato salad, and performative unity. Today, however, it served as a coronation ceremony for the king of lies. Brad stood by the grill tongs in one hand and a bottle of imported beer in the other, holding court like a conquering hero. He was surrounded by my uncles and cousins, men who had worked with their hands their entire lives, listening with rapt attention as Brad spun a fairy tale about software and algorithms. The smoke from the grill swirled around him, creating an almost mythical aura for a man whose credit score was lower than the temperature of the meat. Gentleman, Brad announced, his voice carrying over the Isley Brothers track playing on the speakers. You are looking at the next phase of the internet. I just got word this morning. Aurora Capital. The big dogs. They are practically banging down my door. We are talking about a valuation that is going to put Vision Flow in the Unicorn Club by Christmas. My father, Otis, beamed. He looked around the backyard, catching the eyes of the neighbors, making sure everyone understood that this genius was his future son-in-law. A unicorn, Uncle Ray asked, looking confused. Brad laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. It means $1 billion, Ray. It means we have made it. It means the days of struggling are over. Then came the moment that made my stomach turn physically. Brad walked over to my mother Joyce, who was sitting in her lawn chair fanning herself. He wrapped a sweaty arm around her shoulders and squeezed tight. And I will tell you what the first order of business is, he declared loud enough for the entire street to hear. As soon as that check clears next week, I am moving Otis and Joyce out of this place. No offense to the neighborhood, but you folks deserve a mansion. I am thinking of a gated community, maybe a golf course view down in Buckhead. 6 bedrooms. I am going to buy it cash. No mortgage. Just a small thank you for raising such a beautiful daughter. My mother actually teared up. She pressed her hand to her chest, looking at him as if he were a divine messenger sent to deliver her from mediocrity. Oh, Brad, she whispered, her voice trembling. You are too good to us. You are the son we always prayed for. She looked over at me, her eyes hardening instantly. Why can't you be more like him? Nia, look at what he does for family. I stood by the cooler, nursing a soda, watching my parents worship a man whose bank account was currently overdrawn by $400. They were crying tears of joy over a promise made of smoke. The irony was suffocating. I had paid off their current mortgage 3 years ago anonymously through a trust so they wouldn't have to worry about retirement. I paid their medical bills. I paid for the new roof they thought was covered by insurance. They had never thanked me because they didn't know it was me. Now they were ready to canonize a man who was lying to their faces about a mansion he couldn't afford to rent, let alone buy. Brad caught my eye across the yard. He winked. It was a gloating, arrogant wink that said, I own them. He raised his beer in a mock toast to me. To the future Nia, he called out. Try to keep up. I raised my soda can in return, keeping my face perfectly impassive. I didn't say a word. I just thought about the calendar alert on my phone for Monday morning. The pitch meeting. He thought he was toasting to his future. I knew he was drinking to his funeral. Enjoy the ribs, Brad, I thought. It is the last good meal you are going to have for a very long time. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the backyard, the barbecue transitioned from a party into something that resembled a religious service. Brad was the deity, and my family was the congregation. He sat in my father's favorite lawn chair, feet propped up on the cooler holding court while my mother practically fed him grapes. She had cut him the largest slice of her famous red velvet cake, serving him before she even served herself or my father. Nia, my mother called out, not looking away from Brad. Bring a fresh roll of paper towels. Brad has a little barbecue sauce on his chin. I stood by the trash can holding a heavy black bag filled with the paper plates and bones of the feast they had enjoyed. I looked at my mother. A woman who had once worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, now waiting hand and foot on a man who was lying to her about a mansion he could never afford. I looked at my father Otis, who was listening to Brad explain why college degrees were outdated. The disrespect was no longer just annoying, it was nauseating. For 2 years I had protected them. I had kept my success hidden to avoid making them feel inadequate. I had paid their bills in secret to preserve their dignity. I had allowed them to believe I was struggling so they could feel needed. But as I watched Brad wipe his mouth with the napkin, I had fetched, winking at me with that smug, untouchable arrogance, something inside me finally snapped. Mercy had run its course. I realized that by protecting them from the truth, I was only enabling their delusion. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a scapegoat. And they didn't want a son-in-law. They wanted a lottery ticket. Brad was selling them a dream that was going to turn into a nightmare the moment the eviction notices started showing up. If I didn't stop him now, he would drag them down with him when he crashed. I dropped the trash bag. It hit the ground with a heavy thud, but no one noticed. They were too busy laughing at another one of Brad's jokes. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen seemed to glow brighter in the twilight. I opened my encrypted messaging app and found the thread with David. My thumb hovered over the keyboard for a second, a final moment of hesitation. Once I sent this, there was no going back. The machinery of corporate destruction would be set in motion. I typed out the command that would end Brad's career. Schedule the meeting for Monday morning, 9 sharp. Grant him the full pitch slot. I want a front row seat. I hit send. I watched the checkmark turn blue. Somewhere across the city, David was already moving pieces on the board. Brad's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, squinting at the screen. "No way," he shouted, jumping up and spilling his beer. They replied, "Aurora Capital wants to see me Monday morning. I told you I was going to make it happen." My parents cheered, clapping their hands. Jasmine squealed and hugged him. They were celebrating the email I had just authorized. They were celebrating the beginning of the end. I didn't say goodbye. I turned and walked toward the gate, leaving the noise of their celebration behind me. Let them have their night. Let them have their cake and their fantasies. Monday morning was coming, and when the sun rose, the shadow of the quiet sister was going to cover everything. While I was calmly orchestrating his downfall from the comfort of my penthouse, Brad was experiencing a violent meltdown in what he called his global headquarters. In reality, it was a windowless 10 by 10 sublet above a laundromat that smelled faintly of bleach and desperation. The sleek, glass-walled office he posted on Instagram was actually just a lobby he sneaked into for photos. This cramping room was the truth. Brad paced the stained carpet, his phone pressed so hard against his ear, his knuckles were white. He was arguing with a loan officer from a third-tier regional bank, the only institution that would still take his calls. "Come on, Steve," Brad shouted, his voice cracking. "I am not asking for a handout. It is a bridge loan. 50,000. Just to cover the float until the Series A closes next week. I have Aurora Capital lined up. Do you know who they are? They are going to write me a check with 6 zeros. I just need to keep the lights on until then." There was a pause as the voice on the other end delivered the verdict. Brad stopped pacing. His face went from flushed to gray. "Denied." "What do you mean denied due to delinquency? That payment was in the mail." Steve. He pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at the screen. The call had ended. With a primal scream of frustration, he hurled the device across the room. It slammed into the cheap drywall, leaving a dent before clattering to the floor. He swept his arm across his desk, sending a stack of unpaid invoices and empty energy drink cans flying. He kicked his rolling chair, sending it spinning into the filing cabinet. He was drowning, and the water was rising faster than he could bail. The door opened and Jasmine walked in, freezing in the doorway. She was holding a binder filled with wedding venue brochures, completely oblivious to the financial apocalypse happening in front of her. "Babe," she asked, her voice small. "I was thinking about the plaza for the reception. They have an opening in June, but we need to put down a deposit of $5,000 by tomorrow to hold the date." Brad turned on her like a cornered animal. The mask of the loving, successful fiancé slipped completely. "Shut up, Jasmine," he roared. "Just shut up about the wedding. Can't you see I am working? Can't you see I am trying to build a future here while you obsess over flowers and napkins?" Jasmine recoiled, clutching the binder to her chest. "I just thought, since we are going to be rich next week." "We are not rich yet," he screamed, running his hands through his hair. "I have to close the deal first. And to close the deal, I need to look the part. I need a new suit. I need to get the Tesla detailed. I need to print the prospectus on high-quality stock. I need cash, Jasmine. Right now. Not deposit money for a party. I need operating capital." He looked around the messy room, breathing hard. He was terrified. He knew that if he walked into Aurora Capital looking like a broke amateur, they would smell the fear on him. He needed to maintain the illusion of success for 48 more hours. If he could just fool them, he could pay off everything. But he was tapped out. His cards were frozen. Jasmine's cards were maxed out. He looked at Jasmine, his eyes narrowing. He didn't apologize for yelling. Instead, his mind started working, looking for one last source of liquidity. He remembered the dinner. He remembered me paying the bill. He remembered the lie my parents told him about my savings. "Put the binder away," he said, his voice dropping to a low, manipulative register. "We need money to secure the bag, Jasmine. And I think I know exactly which ATM we are going to use. Call your sister. Tell her we are coming over for dinner. And tell her to have her checkbook ready." That evening, the atmosphere in my parents' living room shifted from hostile to bizarrely hospitable. I was sitting on the sofa nursing a cup of tea and mentally reviewing the term sheet for the Vision Flow acquisition when the front door opened. Brad and Jasmine walked in, but the dark cloud that had followed them earlier was gone. In its place was a frantic, terrifying cheerfulness. Brad was carrying 3 large pizza boxes stacked high, the smell of pepperoni and cheap grease filling the entryway. Jasmine followed him, holding a 6-pack of craft beer and a bottle of wine. They looked like they were arriving for a Super Bowl party, not a casual Tuesday dinner. "Hey, family," Brad announced, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His pupils were dilated, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "We decided to treat you guys tonight. No cooking for Joyce. We are doing a pizza party." My mother clapped her hands, delighted by the mediocrity of the gesture. "Oh, Brad, you are so thoughtful. You really spoil us." They set the food down on the coffee table. Normally, Brad would ignore me or make a snide comment about my employment status. Tonight, he pulled out a chair for me. "Here, Nia, grab a slice while it is hot," he said, his voice straining with forced camaraderie. "I made sure to get one with just veggies. I know you like to eat healthy." I looked at him, then at Jasmine. She was avoiding my gaze, arranging napkins with unnecessary precision. This was a setup. I accepted the slice, taking a small bite, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. After 10 minutes of excruciating small talk about the weather and sports, Brad cleared his throat. He set his beer down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, adopting a posture of serious confidentiality. "So listen, guys," he began, lowering his voice. "I wanted to talk to you about something exciting. The Aurora Capital deal is practically done. We are talking hours away from the wire hitting the account. But you know how these big institutional banks are? The red tape is a nightmare. They have this 24-hour hold on international transfers because of some new compliance regulation. My father nodded sagely, though he had no idea what compliance regulation meant. Of course, son. Banks are always slow. Exactly, Brad said, pointing a finger at Otis. It is ridiculous. But here is the thing. I have vendors lining up. I have the venue deposit for the wedding. I have legal fees. I need to keep the cash flow moving so we don't look stagnant right before the ink dries. It is purely a liquidity issue. He turned his head slowly, locking eyes with me. Nia, he said, his tone softening into something that sounded like affection, but felt like predation. I know you have been saving up. Mom mentioned you still have that rainy day fund from your banking days. You are smart. You are frugal. I admire that. I chewed slowly, swallowing the bite of pizza before speaking. What are you asking, Brad? I am asking for a microloan, he said quickly. Just for 48 hours. Jasmine and I were talking, and we thought, why pay interest to a bank when we can keep the money in the family? If you can float us, say, $5,000 just until Friday, I will pay you back with 10% interest. That is $500 for doing nothing. It is easy money, Nia, Jasmine chimed in, her voice shrill. It is for the wedding too, Nia. We don't want to lose the venue. You would be saving the day. You would finally be contributing something real to this family instead of just watching from the sidelines. I looked at them. They were desperate. They genuinely believed that $5,000 was my entire life savings, and they were willing to drain me dry to patch a hole in a sinking ship. They were asking the sister they called a failure to bankroll their facade. I wiped my hands on a napkin, staring at the grease stain it left behind. $5,000, I repeated. That is a lot of money, Brad. It is an investment, he insisted, his eyes wide and pleading. It is safe. I am the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, Nia. You can trust me. I looked at my parents. They were watching me with expectation. Do it, Nia, my mother urged. Help your brother-in-law. Don't be stingy. I paused, letting the tension build. I wasn't going to give him the money, obviously, but I needed to get him into that meeting room on Monday. I needed him to believe he still had a chance so he wouldn't run away. I don't have access to the funds until Monday morning, I lied smoothly. It is in a high-yield certificate that matures this weekend. Brad's face fell, then rallied. Monday morning. Okay, we can make that work. Bring the check to the office on Monday. You can give it to me right before my meeting with Aurora. It will be a good luck charm. I smiled. It would be a charm, all right. Just not the kind he was hoping for. Brad wiped a smudge of tomato sauce from his lip and leaned back in his chair, visibly more relaxed now that he believed the money was secured. The panic that had been vibrating off him earlier was replaced by his usual swagger, the kind that comes from believing your own con. He looked around the table, making eye contact with everyone except me, and launched into the fabrication that would seal his fate. You know, he started taking a sip of his beer. It is actually funny when you think about it. Most startups spend years begging for a sit-down with a firm like Aurora Capital. They scrape and claw just to get an intern to look at their pitch deck. But with Vision Flow, the dynamic is completely flipped. They are the ones chasing us. My father shook his head in amazement. Chasing you? That is incredible, son. It is wild. Otis? Brad continued, gesturing with a half-eaten slice of pizza. I mean, my inbox is blowing up. Their senior analysts are calling me at all hours. They are terrified I am going to take the deal to Sequoia or Andreessen Horowitz. Yesterday, their managing partner sent me a personal email. He said, and I quote Brad, "We need Vision Flow in our portfolio to anchor our Q3 strategy. Name your price." I took a slow sip of my water to hide the smirk threatening to break through. I was the managing partner. I had never sent him an email. The only thing I had sent was a directive to my assistant to flag his file for a public roasting. Watching him lie about a conversation he never had with a person sitting right across from him was a surreal form of entertainment. So if they want you so bad, why do you need Nia's money? I asked, keeping my tone innocent. Brad didn't miss a beat. That is the bureaucratic nightmare of it all. See, because the valuation is so high, we are talking 8 figures here. There is a massive amount of due diligence required. Aurora has this archaic policy, where the founder has to put up a good faith deposit for the legal retainer before they release the term sheet. It is standard practice for deals of this magnitude. It shows we have skin in the game. It was not standard practice. It was a complete fabrication. No venture capital firm asks a founder to pay to be invested in. That is a scam tactic used on the elderly, not a business protocol. But my parents didn't know that. They nodded along, absorbing his nonsense as if it were financial gospel. That makes sense, my mother said. You have to spend money to make money. Exactly, Joyce, Brad said, pointing a finger at her. And once the ink is dry on Monday afternoon, that retainer comes right back to me, plus the first tranche of $2 million. So really, Nia, you aren't just lending me money. You are facilitating the biggest tech deal in Atlanta this year. You are practically a co-founder. Jasmine squeezed his arm, looking at him with adoration that was entirely purchased. We are going to be on the cover of Forbes, she squealed. The power couple of the South. And Nia, you can tell everyone you helped us get there. I looked at Brad. He was so confident, so sure that he had outsmarted the room. He thought he was painting a picture of success, but all I saw was a man digging his own grave with a pizza crust. Well, I said, setting my glass down. It sounds like Aurora Capital is lucky to have you. I can't wait to hear how the meeting goes. Brad grinned, raising his beer bottle. Oh, it is going to be legendary, Nia. You have no idea. He was right. It was going to be legendary, just not in the way he thought. I decided that if Brad wanted to play the role of the big-shot CEO, I would play the role of the naive, helpful sister to perfection. I widened my eyes, letting a look of sudden realization wash over my face. I set my fork down with a deliberate clatter, drawing the attention of the table. Aurora Capital, I said, repeating the name as if I were testing the flavor of the words. That sounds so familiar. You know, Brad, I think I actually know someone who works there. The table went silent for a beat. Then Brad let out a short, sharp laugh. It was the kind of laugh a parent gives a toddler who claims they can fly. You know someone at Aurora, Nia? He asked, a smirk playing on his lips. Who? The guy who waters the plants in the lobby? Or maybe one of the security guards? I ignored the insult, maintaining my mask of innocent helpfulness. No, not security. I think he is a secretary. Or maybe an administrative assistant. His name is David. I met him at a networking mixer a few years ago when I was still in banking. We kept in touch on LinkedIn. He seems nice. My mother sighed, shaking her head. Nia, please. Brad is dealing with the managing partners. He is dealing with the people who own the building. He doesn't need help from a secretary, but I persisted, leaning forward with feigned enthusiasm. But if the due diligence is taking so long, maybe I could send David an email. Just to check on the status of your file. I am sure he has access to the system. It couldn't hurt, right? Brad exchanged a look with Jasmine. It was a look of shared pity. They truly believed I was pathetic. They thought I was desperately trying to insert myself into their success by offering up a lowly clerical contact. Brad leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. Look, Nia, I appreciate the thought. Really, I do. It is cute. But you have to understand how high-level finance works. A secretary doesn't have clearance to even look at the deal I am structuring. If you start bothering low-level employees, it might actually look bad for me. It might make me look desperate. And we don't want that. We want to project power. I nodded slowly, looking chastised. You are right, Brad. I didn't think of that. I definitely don't want to mess up your big moment. But then, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. However, I said, keeping my voice light. I am just going to send him a quick note anyway. Just a friendly hello. I won't mention the deal specifically. I will just ask if he has heard of Vision Flow. You know, just to see if the buzz is reaching the lower levels like you said. Brad rolled his eyes, waving his hand dismissively. Fine. Go ahead, send your little email. Just don't embarrass me. Tell your friend David that when I take over the boardroom, I will make sure he gets a raise. The table erupted in laughter again. My father slapped his knee. That is the spirit, Brad. Take care of the little people. I unlocked my phone. I didn't open my email app. I opened the encrypted messaging signal I used to communicate with my executive team. I found David's contact. To them, David was a secretary. To the rest of the financial world, David was the director of operations for Aurora Capital, a man who reported only to me. I typed a message, but it wasn't a friendly hello. It was a direct order. Subject: Vision Flow. Message: The fish has taken the bait. Confirm the meeting for Monday at 9 a.m. Ensure the entire senior board is present. I want him to have an audience when he crashes. I hit send. I looked up at Brad, who was busy explaining to my mother how he planned to redecorate the executive suite once the money cleared. Done, I said, smiling sweetly. I sent it. Hopefully it helps. Brad didn't even look at me. Yeah. Thanks, Nia. Now about that $5,000. Can I pick up the check on Monday morning before I head to the meeting? Absolutely, I said. I will hand it to you personally. I wasn't lying. I would hand him something on Monday. It just wouldn't be a check. It would be a reality check. Brad didn't just laugh. He threw his head back and roared a sound so loud and sudden that it startled the cat sleeping in the corner. He slapped the table with his open palm, shaking the silverware and making the wine glasses tremble. It was a performance of pure, unadulterated amusement, the kind of reaction you have when a child says something precocious and impossibly stupid. Jasmine joined in immediately, her high-pitched giggle acting as the harmony to his baritone guffaw. They looked at each other, tears of mirth forming in their eyes, bonded by the sheer absurdity of my suggestion. "Oh, Nia," Brad gasped, wiping a tear from his cheek. "That is adorable." Really, it is. You think a secretary has pull at Aurora Capital? You think the guy who orders the staples and schedules the conference room cleaning is going to walk into the boardroom and tell the managing partners to look at my file? He took a deep breath, composing himself enough to deliver his lecture. He leaned across the table, his expression shifting from amusement to pitying instruction. Let me explain how the corporate ladder works, since you have been off of it for so long. There are levels to this game. Your friend David. He is at ground zero. He is a gatekeeper. His job is to answer phones and look busy. I am operating at the C-suite level. I am talking to the people who own the building, Nia. When I walk into that room on Monday, I am not going to be dealing with the help. I am going to be dealing with the kings. If you have your little friend send an email, it is just going to get lost in the spam folder, along with the offers for discount toner cartridges. Jasmine chimed in, shaking her head as she picked at a pepperoni slice. It is honestly kind of embarrassing that you even suggested it, Nia. It shows how out of touch you are. You are trying to act like you have connections, but you are connecting with the wrong people. It is like bragging that you know the janitor at the White House. It doesn't mean you get a meeting with the president. My face burned not with shame, but with the effort of holding back the truth. They had no idea that David, the man they were dismissing as a stapler orderer, was actually the director of operations for the entire firm. He didn't answer phones. He answered only to me. And the kings, Brad was so eager to meet, they all reported to David. My mother, sensing that the laughter was dying down, decided to deliver the final blow to ensure I stayed in my place. She reached over and patted my hand, her touch heavy and condescending. "Honey, stop trying to insert yourself into things you don't understand," she said softly. "We know you want to feel involved. We know you want to feel important. But let the men handle the business. You don't want to make yourself look foolish by sending emails to people who don't matter. Just focus on finding your own path." "Okay, let Brad handle the big leagues." I pulled my hand away gently. "You are right, Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I wouldn't want to overstep. I am sure Brad has everything under control." "Oh, I definitely do," Brad said, draining his beer. And when I walk out of there on Monday with a check for $2 million, I will make sure to tell the receptionist you said hello. Maybe he can give you a discount on paper clips." He winked at me. I smiled back. It was the last time he would ever wink at me with that much confidence. He thought he was dismissing a nuisance. He didn't realize he was mocking the executioner while his head was already in the guillotine. 3 minutes. That was exactly how long it took for the command to travel from my phone to David's encrypted server and then manifest as a priority notification on Brad's device. For those 3 minutes, Brad continued to hold court, lecturing my father on the nuances of corporate hierarchy and why people like me would never understand the pressure of the executive suite. He was mid-sentence explaining why he needed a new ergonomic chair for his non-existent office when his phone buzzed against the wooden table. It wasn't a text message ping. It was the distinct authoritative chime of his primary email client, a sound he had likely set to maximum volume in desperate anticipation of this very moment. He glanced down at the screen, casually, probably expecting a spam email or a bill collector he would have to ignore. But then he froze. The slice of pizza in his hand hovered halfway to his mouth. He blinked once, then twice, leaning in closer to the screen, as if he were trying to read a foreign language. The color drained from his face, only to be replaced instantly by a flush of adrenaline-fueled red. No way, he whispered, the words escaping him like a prayer. "No freaking way." "What is it, babe?" Jasmine asked, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Is it bad news?" Brad ignored her. He snatched the phone up, unlocking it with trembling fingers. He read the screen, his eyes darting back and forth, devouring the text. Then he let out a shout that echoed off the walls of the small dining room, a primal scream of victory that made my mother jump in her seat. "I told you!" Brad roared, jumping up from his chair and thrusting the phone into the air like a championship trophy. "I told you I was going to do it," they replied. Aurora. Capital replied. My father's jaw dropped. "You are kidding. They want to invest." "Listen to this," Brad commanded, his voice shaking with excitement. He cleared his throat, adopting a deep, serious tone as he read the email aloud. "Dear Mr. Sterling, the Executive Board has reviewed your preliminary file. We are intrigued by the synergy Vision Flow presents. The managing partner has personally requested a pitch meeting with you regarding the Series A financing. We have a slot open this Monday at 9 a.m. Please confirm immediately." He looked up at us, his eyes wild. The managing partner. Otis. Do you hear that? Not an associate, not a junior analyst. The managing partner requested me personally. Jasmine screamed, jumping up to wrap her arms around his neck. "Oh my God, Brad! We are going to be rich. I knew it. I knew you were a genius." My mother was clapping her hands, rocking back and forth. "Thank you, Jesus. I knew this breakthrough was coming. I knew it." I sat there quietly sipping my water, watching the circus I had directed. They were celebrating a funeral procession, thinking it was a parade. Brad pulled away from Jasmine and looked at me. His expression was pure, unadulterated smugness. He tapped the phone screen against his palm. "See, Nia," he said, his voice dripping with vindication. "This is what I was talking about. This email came through the official executive channel. It has nothing to do with your little secretary friend. While you were sending messages to the help, the bosses were already looking at my file. That is the difference between us. You aim for the bottom, I aim for the top." I smiled, a genuine smile this time, because his arrogance was making this so much sweeter. "You are right, Brad," I said softly. "I clearly underestimated your reach." He laughed, sliding the phone back into his pocket. "It is okay. Not everyone is built for this life. Now about that check. Since I have the meeting confirmed, I am going to need that cash first thing Monday. I need to get my suit dry cleaned and get the car detailed. I have to look like a man worth $10 million. I nodded. "I will be there, Brad. I wouldn't miss it for the world." He turned back to my parents, launching into a new speech about which neighborhoods they should start looking at for their new mansion. He didn't know that the managing partner who had requested him was sitting 3 feet away already mentally drafting the press release for his bankruptcy. The Velvet Lounge was the kind of establishment where the lighting was dim enough to hide imperfections but bright enough to catch the sparkle of diamonds. It was a place for people who had made it, or in Brad's case, people who were pretending to have made it until the very last second. He snapped his fingers at the server, a gesture that was both rude and desperate, ordering a bottle of Dom Perignon without looking at the price list. When he handed over his credit card, I wasn't there to see it, but I know he held his breath. It was his last active card, hovering dangerously close to its limit. When the server returned with the bottle and the card was approved, Brad exhaled a cloud of relief that he disguised as a sigh of contentment. To the visionaries he toasted, clinking his crystal flute against Jasmine's. To the ones who dare to dream big while everyone else is sleeping. Jasmine took a sip, her eyes already glazing over with the intoxication of future wealth. She set her glass down and immediately pulled up a real estate app on her phone. She swiped past the reasonable homes and went straight to the estates listed in the 7-figure range. "Look at this one, babe," she said, tilting the screen toward him. "It has a wraparound terrace and a wine cellar. We could host the engagement party here. Imagine the photos. We could hire a private chef. Mom would freak out." Brad glanced at the screen, nodding with the casual indifference of a man who believes he can buy the world. "Add it to the short list. But we need a 6-car garage. I am going to put an order in for the new McLaren on Tuesday. The Tesla is fine for the interim, but a CEO needs a flagship vehicle." Jasmine giggled, scrolling further. "I am going to spoil Mom so much. I want to get her that Louis Vuitton trunk she saw in the magazine, the one that costs $5,000. She can put it in her new foyer. She will finally have something nice to show her friends at church. It will show everyone that she raised a winner." They spent the next hour spending money that didn't exist. They furnished imaginary rooms, booked first-class tickets to the Maldives, and hired a staff of invisible servants. In their minds, the transaction was already complete. The meeting on Monday was just a formality, a ceremonial handing over of the keys to the kingdom. Naturally, the conversation drifted to the person they were leaving behind. "We should probably get Nia something," Jasmine said, though her tone suggested it was a chore. "Maybe a gift card to a clothing store? Something to help her get out of those drab gray outfits. She looks like a nun half the time." Brad laughed, topping off his glass. "Don't waste your money, Jazz. Nia doesn't want help, she wants to be miserable. Did you see her face when I got that email? She looked like she swallowed a lemon. She is jealous. Purely and simply. She can't stand that I came into this family and eclipsed her in 6 months. She will probably ask for a job once the news hits the press," Jasmine mused. "Maybe," Brad said, swirling his champagne. "And you know what, I might give her one. We will need someone to walk the dogs when we are in Paris for Fashion Week. It would be good for her. Teach her some humility." They clinked glasses again, laughing at the image of me picking up after their pets. They drank the expensive champagne, oblivious to the fact that they were toasting on the edge of a cliff. The bill for tonight would go through, but the interest on their karma was compounding by the second. They were celebrating the start of their empire, unaware that they were actually throwing the wrap party for their own demise. While Brad and Jasmine were busy toasting to a future they would never see, I was in the sanctuary of my dressing room, preparing for their execution. My closet was a climate-controlled space, larger than the living room of the apartment Brad rented. It was lined with cedar and glass, a library of fashion where every hanger held a piece of armor. For the past 2 years, I had worn soft fabrics, muted colors, and shapeless silhouettes around my family. I had played the role of the soft, harmless creature. But for Monday morning, the costume had to change. I needed to dress not just for a meeting, but for a massacre. I walked past the rows of cashmere sweaters and silk blouses. I stopped at the section reserved for high-stakes warfare. My fingers trailed over the fabric's wool crepe-structured cotton before landing on the chosen piece. It was a bespoke suit from Savile Row, tailored to within a millimeter of my life. The color was a deep midnight navy so dark it almost swallowed the light. The jacket had sharp architectural shoulders that projected absolute authority, and the trousers were cut to elongate my stride, turning every step into a statement. I pulled it from the rack, the heavy hanger clinking softly. I laid it out on the velvet island in the center of the room. This wasn't just clothing, it was a psychological weapon. When Brad walked into that boardroom, I needed him to feel small before I even opened my mouth. I needed the visual shock of seeing Cousin Nia transformed into a titan of industry to disorient him completely. I moved to the accessory drawer. I bypassed the delicate gold chains and modest studs I wore to Sunday dinners. I opened the biometric safe hidden behind a false panel. Inside sat my collection of horological heavyweights. I reached for the Patek Philippe Nautilus with the blue dial. It was a watch that cost more than Brad's entire company valuation. It was understated to the untrained eye, but to anyone in finance it screamed legitimate power. I clasped it around my wrist, feeling the cold weight of the metal. It was a grounding anchor. Next came the shoes. I chose a pair of black patent leather pumps with a 4-inch stiletto heel. They were not comfortable. They were not designed for walking dogs or running errands. They were designed to make a specific sound, a sharp, rhythmic click-clack against a marble floor that announced the arrival of the boss. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling three-way mirror. I straightened the lapel of the jacket. I pulled my hair back into a severe, sleek bun, exposing the sharp line of my jaw. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me, and that was the point. The Nia my parents knew was gone. In her place stood the managing partner of Aurora Capital. I took a deep breath, watching my own pupils dilate in the reflection. I practiced the look I would give him. It wasn't a glare, it wasn't a frown, it was a look of absolute terrifying neutrality. The look of a predator deciding which limb to tear off first. "Please take a seat, Mr. Sterling," I whispered to the glass, my voice dropping an octave, stripping away the warmth. I adjusted my posture, lifting my chin. I rehearsed the opening line again. "I believe you have met my secretary, David." A cold smile touched my lips. I was ready. The stage was set, the script was written, and the lead actor was walking blindly into the final act. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. I watched their arrival on the high-definition monitors mounted on my office wall. The security feed from the lobby offered a crisp 4K resolution view of the sheep walking into the slaughterhouse. The Meridian Tower was designed to intimidate. Its lobby was a cavern of Italian marble and slate dominated by a 40-foot waterfall that cost more to maintain annually than Brad's entire company had generated in revenue since its inception. To the average visitor, it was breathtaking. To Brad and Jasmine, it was a stage. Brad pushed through the revolving doors, first stepping onto the polished floor with a hesitation that betrayed his nerves. He was wearing a gray suit that fit poorly around the shoulders, likely a rack purchase from a department store sale, attempting to mimic the bespoke tailoring of the men who actually worked in this building. He stopped in the center of the atrium, looking up at the vaulted glass ceiling, his mouth slightly open. I could see him adjusting his tie, smoothing his hair physically, trying to expand his presence to fill a space that was designed to make him feel small. Jasmine trailed behind him, and true to form, she didn't take a moment to respect the gravity of the environment. She took out her phone. I zoomed in on the feed. She was live streaming. In the middle of the headquarters of one of the most private and secure venture capital firms in the South, my sister was doing a fit check for her 300 followers. I could imagine the caption without seeing it. #BossMoves, #EmpireBuilding, #$1,000,000 Monday. She posed next to the abstract bronze sculpture near the elevators, popping her hip and pouting, treating a piece of fine art like a prop in a mall photo booth. On the screen, I saw the head of lobby security, a former Marine named Marcus, step out from behind the slate desk. He approached them with the professional menace he reserved for tourists and trespassers. Brad jumped slightly when Marcus spoke. I saw Brad gesture wildly, pointing at the ceiling, likely name-dropping the firm to prove he belonged. Marcus checked his tablet, his face impassive. He nodded, once handed Brad a visitor badge that was visibly different from the employee passes, a bright yellow plastic tag that screamed guest. Jasmine tried to follow, but Marcus held up a hand. The policy was strict. Only principals in the meeting were allowed up to the executive floor. Jasmine argued. I saw her hand gestures become sharp and entitled. She pointed at her phone, then at Brad. She was probably explaining that she was the co-founder's fiancé, or the chief muse. Marcus didn't budge. He pointed toward the waiting area, a cluster of leather chairs near the door. Defeated, Jasmine pouted, gave Brad a dramatic kiss on the cheek that looked entirely performative, and retreated to the seating area to likely update her story about how exclusive the security was. Brad turned toward the elevator bank alone. I watched him step into the dedicated express elevator that serviced only the top 3 floors. He was alone in the metal box. He checked his reflection in the mirrored walls, flashing a double thumbs up to himself. He looked pumped. He looked ready. He had no idea that the elevator wasn't taking him up to a meeting. It was taking him up to a sentencing hearing. I turned off the monitor and spun my chair around to face the door. It was showtime. I had instructed security to let Jasmine up exactly 10 minutes after Brad. It wasn't an act of kindness. It was a strategic calculation. Isolation is painful, but humiliation requires an audience. I wanted her to be there not to support him, but to witness the dismantling of the idol she had worshipped. I watched them now on the high-definition monitor from the comfort of my office, a predator observing prey in a glass cage. They were seated in holding room B, a space I had specifically designed for intimidation. The furniture was sleek Italian and intentionally uncomfortable. The thermostat was set to 65 degrees, just cold enough to induce shivering in anyone not wearing high-quality wool. And the clock on the wall was the only sound in the room, ticking with a slow, rhythmic malice. The meeting was scheduled for 9. It was now 9:45. Brad was unraveling. The arrogance that had carried him through the lobby was leaking out of him with every drop of sweat that beaded on his forehead. He had already consumed 3 small bottles of water from the complimentary tray, a nervous tic that betrayed his dry mouth. He kept checking his watch, then his phone, then the door. He adjusted his tie for the 50th time, the cheap fabric clearly irritating his neck. He looked like a man on trial who had just realized his lawyer wasn't showing up. "They are just testing us," he muttered to Jasmine. His voice picked up clearly by the room's microphone system. "It is a power move, classic negotiation tactic. They want to see if I crack. They want to see if I have the patience of a CEO." Jasmine didn't look convinced. She was shivering in her thin, fast-fashion dress, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She had stopped live-streaming 20 minutes ago, when the receptionist, a woman with a smile like a shark, had politely informed her that recording devices were prohibited on the executive floor. Now, without her digital mirror, she looked small and out of place. "Babe, are you sure you got the time right?" she whispered, glancing at the heavy oak doors that remained firmly shut. "Maybe we should ask the receptionist again." "I am not asking her again. Jasmine." Brad snapped his voice tight with suppressed panic. "You don't nag the gatekeeper. We sit here, we wait, and we show them we are professionals. This is how billion-dollar deals happen. They make you wait to see if you are desperate. If we walk out or complain, we lose." He was trying to convince himself more than her. I could see his leg bouncing uncontrollably under the table. The silence of the room was amplifying his internal noise. He was running through every lie he had told, every dollar he owed, every fraud he had committed. He was wondering if we knew. He was wondering if the delay wasn't a test, but a trap. Jasmine reached out to touch his hand, but he pulled away, standing up to pace the small room. "Stop moving," she hissed. "You are making me nervous." "I have to keep my energy up," he retorted, wiping his palms on his trousers. "When that door opens, I have to be on. I have to be dynamic. I can't be sitting there looking cold." He walked to the window looking out at the skyline. He was trying to look like a visionary contemplating his empire, but from my angle he just looked like a man looking for a fire escape. He breathed on the glass, fogging it up, then angrily wiped it away. The cracks were showing. The facade of the tech god was crumbling under the weight of 45 minutes of silence. He wasn't a CEO anymore. He was just a broke con artist in a rented suit, terrified that the world was finally about to ask for the receipt. I pressed the intercom button on my desk, connecting to my assistant outside their door. "Send them in," I said, my voice calm and final. I watched Brad jump as the heavy oak doors finally clicked open. He spun around, plastering a fake, terrified smile onto his face. He straightened his jacket, took a deep breath, and prepared to walk into the lion's den, completely unaware that the lion was wearing his sister-in-law's face. The double doors to the grand boardroom swung open with a heavy pneumatic hiss, revealing a chamber that was less a meeting room and more a tribunal. The space was cavernous, dominated by a 30-foot table carved from a single slab of obsidian, polished to a black mirror finish. Lining the sides were 10 of my most senior directors and analysts, men and women who managed billion-dollar portfolios before breakfast. They sat in absolute silence, their hands clasped on the table, their faces void of any expression. There were no water bottles, no notepads, no laptops. Just 20 eyes fixed on the doorway, with the predatory intensity of sharks sensing a drop of blood in the water. Brad stepped across the threshold and immediately faltered. The confident stride he had practiced in the lobby evaporated the moment the cold air of the room hit him. He looked for a friendly face, a smile, a nod of encouragement. He found none. He found only a wall of charcoal suits and judgment. Jasmine, walking half a step behind him, actually audibly gasped. She shrank into herself, clutching her purse as if it were a shield, suddenly realizing that her boss babe hashtags held no power here. "Please take the podium," one of my directors, Marcus, said. His voice was low, authoritative, and did not invite small talk. Brad swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "Right. Yes. Absolutely. The podium. Great setup you have here. Really top tier." He shuffled to the front of the room, fumbling with his laptop bag. The silence stretched on, agonizing and thick. The sound of him unzipping his bag seemed deafening. He pulled out his laptop, his hands shaking so badly he dropped his dongle. It clattered onto the marble floor, spinning loudly. He scrambled to pick it up, his face flushing a deep mottled red. "Sorry, just technical difficulties. You know how technology is, right? Even for tech guys." No one laughed. No one moved. He finally plugged in. The screen behind him lit up with his slide deck. The font was Comic Sans. The logo was pixelated. It looked like a high school project compared to the sleek minimalist architecture of the room. Brad cleared his throat, wiped his sweaty palms on his jacket, and began. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of Aurora Capital. I am Brad Sterling, CEO and founder of Vision Flow, and I am here to tell you about the future." He paused for dramatic effect. It fell flat. "See, the world is moving fast, like really fast, and data is everywhere. It is the new oil, and Vision Flow is the drill. We are utilizing, synergistic blockchain protocols to disrupt the paradigm of consumer analytics." He was throwing out every buzzword he knew, hoping one would stick. "We are pre-revenue." Obviously, he continued, his voice cracking. "But the potential is infinite. We just need capital to ignite the rocket. And with your $2 million, we can pivot to a machine learning model that will..." He trailed off, looking at the stone faces of the board. He was drowning. He was sweating through his shirt, the damp patches becoming visible under the harsh boardroom lights. He looked at Jasmine for help, but she was staring at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with the disaster unfolding in front of her. Brad was alone, dancing for an audience that had already decided to cancel the show. Brad was mid-sentence, stuttering through a chaotic explanation of his non-existent revenue stream when I decided to end the charade. He was pointing at a graph that trended downward, trying to explain that it was actually an inverted growth curve when the heavy double doors at the far end of the room unlatched. The sound was distinct, a heavy mechanical thud that echoed off the stone walls, cutting through his nervous rambling like a guillotine blade. The room went from quiet to breathless. Brad stopped talking, his hand freezing in midair. He turned toward the entrance, likely expecting security to remove an intruder, or perhaps a waiter bringing water. I stepped across the threshold. The transformation was absolute. I wasn't wearing the soft, shapeless gray cardigans he was used to seeing me in at Sunday dinners. I was encased in the midnight navy bespoke suit, the fabric absorbing the harsh boardroom light rather than reflecting it. My hair was pulled back so tight it sharpened every angle of my face. But it was the sound of my approach that terrified him most. My stilettos struck the marble floor with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Click, click, click. Each step was a hammer blow to the silence. Brad squinted, confusion warring with annoyance on his sweating face. He blinked, his brain struggling to reconcile the image of the high-powered executive walking toward him with the unemployed sister-in-law he treated like a servant. He took a step forward, dropping his voice to a frantic whisper, assuming I had somehow wandered in by mistake. "Nia," he hissed, his eyes darting to the silent board members. "What the hell are you doing here? This is a closed meeting. You can't just walk in here. You are going to get arrested. Get out before security comes." I ignored him completely. I didn't even shift my gaze to acknowledge his existence. I kept walking, my eyes fixed on the empty leather chair at the head of the obsidian table. As I passed the halfway mark of the room, the 10 senior directors, men and women who terrified Wall Street, did something that made Brad's knees buckle. As one, without a word being spoken, they pushed back their chairs and stood up. It was a synchronized display of absolute deference. They weren't standing for a guest. They were standing for the commander. David, the man Brad had mocked as a secretary, stepped forward from his position near the front. He didn't look at Brad. He looked at me, bowing his head slightly. "Good morning, Ms. Jenkins," David said, his voice clear and respectful. "The board is assembled. We are ready to review the acquisition target." Brad let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. He looked at David, then at me, then back at David. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse standing upright. "Ms. Jenkins," he stammered the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. I walked past him. I was close enough to smell the fear on him, a mix of stale coffee and cheap cologne. I reached the head of the table and turned. I placed my hands on the cool stone surface, leaning forward slightly. The room waited. I finally looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me lazy, the man who had mocked my clothes, the man who had tried to steal my savings. "Please take a seat, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice dropping to that icy, terrifying register I saved for hostile takeovers. "You were just explaining to my board why your company, which has 0 assets and 3 months of unpaid payroll, is worth a $2 million investment from my firm." I sat down, crossing my legs. "Don't stop on my account," I added, a small, cruel smile playing on my lips. "Proceed." The human brain is a fascinating mechanism. When faced with a reality that violently contradicts its established worldview, it will often reject the evidence of its own eyes in favor of a comfortable delusion. Brad looked at me, sitting at the head of the obsidian table. He looked at the 10 senior directors standing in deferential silence. He looked at the nameplate on the desk that read Managing Partner. And yet his mind simply refused to process the data. He blinked rapidly, a nervous, glitching smile twitching at the corner of his mouth, desperately searching for an explanation that allowed him to remain the protagonist of the story. He found it in the only place his limited imagination could go. "Nia," he laughed, the sound incredulous and high-pitched. He shook his head, looking around at the board members as if apologizing for a wayward child. "Okay, seriously, this is... wow. Did Mom put you up to this? Did she send you down here to bring us refreshments?" He took a step toward me, his confidence surging back as he latched onto this new narrative. You are catering the meeting. That is it, right? You got a temp job with the building services. That is great, Nia, really. I am proud of you for finally working. But read the room. He gestured wildly at the silent executives. We are in the middle of a high-level pitch here. This is a closed session. We don't need coffee right now. We don't need bagels. You are interrupting serious business. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the cold stone table, watching him unravel. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Jasmine, seeing Brad take charge, found her voice again. She stepped forward, her face flushed with secondhand embarrassment. Nia, please, she hissed. You are making us look so bad. Just leave the water pitcher and go. We will tip you later. Just get out before you get fired on your first day. Brad's patience snapped. He mistook my silence for obstinance. He marched up to the head of the table, invading my personal space, his face twisting into a scowl of pure irritation. Nia, are you deaf? He snapped. I said get out. This is for closers. This is for the big leagues. You are embarrassing yourself, and frankly, you are embarrassing me. I can't have the investors thinking I am related to the help. He reached out. It was a fatal error in judgment. He extended his hand, intending to grab my upper arm and physically escort me out of the chair, to drag me out of the room like a misbehaving pet. Come on, let's go. He grunted, his fingers inches from the fabric of my bespoke suit. The reaction was instantaneous. Before his skin could make contact with mine, Marcus, the head of security who had been standing silently in the corner, moved with the speed of a striking cobra. In one fluid motion, he stepped between us, intercepting Brad's wrist in a grip that looked painful enough to fracture bone. Brad yelped, recoiling as if he had been burned. He stumbled back, clutching his wrist, looking at Marcus in shock. Hey, Brad, shouted, his voice cracking. What is your problem? I am the guest here. She is the intruder. Remove her. I slowly stood up. The sound of my chair sliding back against the floor was the only noise in the room. I looked down at Brad, who was nursing his wrist, still completely oblivious to the gravity of his situation. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice calm, cool, and carrying the weight of absolute authority. You seem confused. Let me clarify the organizational chart for you one last time. I am not the caterer. I am not the temp. And I am certainly not bringing you coffee. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. I am the bank. And you just tried to assault the chairman of the board. Marcus released Brad's arm with a shove that was barely polite, stepping back into the shadows, but remaining close enough to strike again if necessary. Brad stumbled, rubbing his wrist, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He looked around the room, desperate for someone to break character, for someone to tell him this was a prank show or a hallucination. But the room held its breath. The silence was absolute, heavy with the weight of money and power. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket and slowly lowered myself into the high-backed leather chair at the head of the table. It was a movement of ownership. I didn't just sit. I presided. I placed my hands on the armrests and looked out over the assembly of my empire. To my right, Arthur Henderson, my chief financial officer, and a man who had terrified CEOs for 3 decades, stood up. He adjusted his rimless glasses, ignored Brad completely, and turned his body toward me. Madam Chair, he said, his voice crisp and resonant, cutting through the thick tension like a scalpel. We have prepared the forensic audit on the applicant vision flow, as per your instruction. The risk assessment team is ready to present their findings on the solvency or lack thereof of the entity. Shall we begin the proceedings? The words hung in the air. Madam Chair, forensic audit, solvency. It was the final nail in the coffin of Brad's delusion. The color drained from his face so completely that his skin took on the waxy gray quality of uncooked dough. His knees gave way, and he collapsed heavily into the guest chair behind him, not because he chose to sit, but because his legs could no longer support the weight of his realization. He stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, seeing me for the first time. He saw the suit. He saw the watch. He saw the way these powerful men looked at me with fear and respect. The unemployed sister vanished, replaced by the titan who held his life in her hands. Jasmine was frozen beside him. Her hands were trembling violently, clutching her purse so tight her knuckles were white. Her eyes darted from my face to the nameplate on the desk, then to the CFO, and finally back to me. I saw the moment the horror hit her. She realized that the fake Birkin she had destroyed was real. She realized the secretary she had mocked was my subordinate. She realized that every insult she had hurled at me for 2 years had been noted, catalogued, and was about to be returned with interest. I don't understand, Brad whispered, his voice a broken, raspy thing. You run this, all of this. I didn't answer him directly. I picked up the dossier in front of me, the one labeled Vision Flow Liquidation Analysis. I flipped it open, the sound of the paper crisp and loud. Mr. Henderson, I said, keeping my eyes on the documents. Please proceed. I am particularly interested in the section regarding the misappropriation of payroll taxes. I believe Mr. Sterling was just telling us how he plans to use our capital to ignite the rocket. Let's see if he has enough fuel to even pay for his parking ticket downstairs. I flipped to page 4 of the dossier. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room, sharp and decisive. I didn't look at Brad. I looked at the data, treating his life's work with the clinical detachment of a coroner, determining a cause of death. Let's begin with the valuation, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. Mr. Sterling, in your preliminary application, you stated that Vision Flow has a pre-money valuation of $10 million, based on a proprietary algorithm and a user base of 50,000 active daily unique logins. Brad wiped sweat from his upper lip, nodding frantically. Yes. Yes, exactly. The growth has been exponential. We are viral. I raised my eyes, locking them onto his. Exponential is an interesting word choice, I said. Because according to our deep dive analytics of your server traffic, your actual user count isn't 50,000, it is 14. The room went deadly silent. Jasmine let out a small, confused squeak. 14 users. Mr. Sterling, I repeated. And upon cross-referencing the IP addresses, we discovered that 12 of them originate from your parents' house in Ohio, 1 is your own laptop, and the last one is a bot from a click farm in Bangladesh. That is a glitch, Brad stammered, his voice climbing an octave. The analytics dashboard is beta. It doesn't capture the offline engagement. I ignored him, turning the page. Let's move to revenue, I continued. You listed an annual recurring revenue of $200,000. That is the number you used to justify your burn rate to my parents. That is the number you used to try and secure a loan from me. I tapped the spreadsheet. However, our forensic accountant found no evidence of subscription income. What we did find was a series of cash deposits totaling $40,000 over the last year. These were not client payments. These were personal transfers from a savings account belonging to a Mrs. Martha Sterling. Your grandmother, I presume. Brad turned pale. That is seed capital. It is an angel investment. Booking a personal loan from a relative as recurring revenue is not an investment. Brad, I said, my voice hardening. It is fraud. It is a deliberate misrepresentation of assets to solicit funds from accredited investors. In the banking world, we have a term for that. We call it a felony. I stood up, walking slowly around the table toward him. He shrank back in his chair, looking like a child caught stealing candy, except the candy was federal prison time. You walked into my office, wasted my board's time, and insulted my intelligence with a pitch deck that a first-year business student would fail. You don't have a company, Brad. You have a hallucination. You are bleeding cash you don't have on a lifestyle you can't afford, hoping that if you say the word blockchain, enough times someone will write you a check. I stopped right in front of him, looming over his seated form. You told me I needed to learn about cash flow, I said softly. Well, here is your lesson. Your burn rate is 100%. Your churn rate is 100%. And your solvency is 0. You are not a CEO. You are a liability. And liabilities get liquidated. I turned my back on the ruin of a man that was Brad Sterling, leaving him gasping for air in his chair. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. I let it linger for a moment, enjoying the sound of their synchronized heartbeats, before I slowly pivoted on my heel to face the other guest at the table. Jasmine was trying to make herself invisible. She had shrunk down in her leather seat, clutching her purse to her chest like a life raft in a hurricane. When my eyes locked onto hers, she flinched physically. She looked at me not as her sister but as a stranger who had just committed a murder in front of her. And then we have the executive team, I said, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. I picked up the organizational chart Brad had included in his pitch deck. I tapped a fingernail against her name. Ms. Jasmine Jenkins, listed here as the Chief Marketing Officer and Strategic Advisor. I looked up at the board members. Gentlemen, I said, addressing my directors while keeping my gaze fixed on Jasmine. In my experience, a Chief Marketing Officer is responsible for brand identity, market penetration, and customer acquisition. I was curious to see how Ms. Jenkins was driving growth for Vision Flow. I picked up a remote control and clicked it at the screen behind me. The slide changed from financial graphs to a collage of screenshots. They were all from Jasmine's Instagram account. The first image was a selfie of her holding a glass of champagne in a bathtub captioned #HustleHard, #VisionFlow, #CEO-Life. The second was a photo of her and Brad standing in front of a private jet that wasn't theirs, with the caption, "Catching flights, not feelings." I see a lot of hashtags. Jasmine, I said, walking slowly toward her. I see a lot of lifestyle curation. But what I don't see is a single strategy for client retention. Is your marketing plan entirely based on convincing your 300 followers that you are wealthy? Jasmine's lip trembled. I was building the brand aesthetic, she whispered. Perception is reality, Nia. You wouldn't understand. Perception is not reality, Jasmine, I corrected her sharply. Solvency is reality. And speaking of perception versus reality, let's talk about your eye for quality. I stopped right next to her chair. I reached out and tapped the purse she was clutching so tightly. It was a flashy, logo-covered bag that she had bought last month. You have a habit of confusing value with price tags, I said. You walk around judging everyone else, calling me a failure, calling me a disgrace, all while draping yourself in things you think make you look important. You lectured me about ambition while you were drowning in credit card debt to buy shoes you can't walk in. I leaned down, bringing my face close to hers, so only she could hear the next part clearly, though in the silence of the room, it carried to everyone. You told the family my Birkin bag was a fake. You laughed when you spilled wine on it. You said it didn't matter because it was a knockoff. I straightened up, my expression turning icy. That bag was a limited edition Hermes Jasmine. It cost $40,000, and I have the receipt, the certificate of authenticity, and the security footage of you ruining it in my file. Jasmine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. It was real. Everything about me is real. Jasmine, I said, my voice ringing with finality. My money, my job, my power. The only things in this room that are fake are your title, your fiancé's company, and that polyester dress you are wearing. I turned back to the board, dismissing her with a wave of my hand. Record the marketing advisor as redundant and unqualified. She brings no value to the table. In fact, looking at her track record of theft and deception, I would classify her as a reputational risk. Remove her from the prospectus. The silence that followed my dismantling of Jasmine was broken by the sound of fabric sliding against leather. Brad didn't just stand up, he dissolved. The last remnants of his pride evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, cornered animal. He slid out of his chair, his knees hitting the cold marble floor with a dull thud that made the CFO flinch. It was a display of abject surrender, the kind that makes everyone in the room uncomfortable. He crawled forward a few inches, reaching out toward me, but stopping short, afraid of the consequences of touching me again. His face was wet with tears and sweat, his expensive haircut now a disheveled mess. "Nia, please," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Let's not be rash. Let's not be hasty. We are family. You can't do this to family." I looked down at him from the height of my chair. The perspective shift was symbolic and satisfying. 10 minutes ago he was looking down on me. Now he was literally at my feet. "I am not a bad guy," he pleaded, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It is just the market. The economy is brutal right now. I was just trying to survive. I did it for Jasmine. I did it for your parents. I wanted to give them the life they deserve." I got in over my head, "Nia. You know how it is. You are a businesswoman. You understand leverage. I just needed a bridge." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and begging. "Call it a loan," he bargained. "A personal loan. I will pay you back. I swear. Just don't ruin me. Don't blacklist me. If you put this on the record, I will never work in this town again. Please, sis. For old time's sake." The word "sis" hung in the air like a foul odor. He was invoking a bond he had spent 2 years severing with insults and mockery. He was trying to cash in on a relationship he had bankrupted. I stood up slowly. I walked around the desk until I was standing directly over him. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. He was a bad investment, and I was closing the account. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth, "you are not a victim of the market. You are a victim of your own ego. You are not family. You are a fraud who happened to date my sister. And as for being a businessman knows when the deal is dead." I turned my gaze to Marcus, who was waiting by the door like a coiled spring. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to explain. "Security," I said, my tone flat. "Escort these guests off the premises and revoke their visitor badges. If they return, treat it as criminal trespassing." Marcus moved instantly. He grabbed Brad by the back of his cheap suit jacket, hauling him to his feet. Brad struggled, shouting something about rights and lawsuits, but he was dead weight. Jasmine scrambled up, terrified, backing away toward the door. I turned my back on them, returning my attention to the financial reports on my desk. I didn't watch them leave. They were no longer my concern. The elevator ride down was silent, but it was the silence of a bomb that had already detonated. Marcus, true to his word, did not offer them the courtesy of a private exit. He deposited them right in the center of the atrium beneath the 40-foot waterfall that now sounded like roaring applause for their failure. When the elevator doors closed, cutting off their access to the world of power they had briefly trespassed in, Brad finally snapped. The reality of his situation, the debt, the impending lawsuits, the total exposure of his fraud crashed down on him. He needed a target. He couldn't hit me and he couldn't hit Marcus, so he turned on the only person left in his orbit. Jasmine was wiping mascara from her cheeks, looking terrified. "Brad, wait," she stammered, reaching for his sleeve. "We can figure this out. Maybe Mom can talk to her. Maybe we can sue her for entrapment." Brad spun around, his face twisted into a mask of ugly, unfiltered rage. He slapped her hand away with enough force to make a cracking sound. "Shut up!" he screamed, his voice echoing off the marble walls, stopping the lobby traffic instantly. "Just shut your mouth, you stupid, useless leech!" Jasmine recoiled, her eyes wide with shock. "Brad, what are you saying?" "I am saying you ruined my life," he roared. He was projecting his failure onto her with the velocity of a cannonball. "You told me she was a loser. You told me she was a nobody. You sat there and let me walk into that room and get slaughtered." "I didn't know," Jasmine sobbed, stepping back. "She lied to us, too." "You are supposed to know," Brad yelled, advancing on her. "You are her sister. But you were too busy taking selfies and spending my money to notice that your own sister owns the bank. You are a parasite, Jasmine. That is all you are. You drained me dry and now you have nothing to show for it." He was shaking, the adrenaline of the coward taking over. He looked around the lobby, seeing the eyes of the receptionists, the security guards, the visiting executives. He saw the judgment. He needed to distance himself from her to make her the anchor that dragged him down. "We are done," he spat. "The wedding is off. The engagement is off. Give me the ring back." He reached for her hand. Jasmine pulled back, clutching her finger. "No, you can't. I said give it to me." He lunged. In the scuffle, he didn't just grab her hand, he shoved her. It was a hard, violent push against her shoulder. Jasmine balanced precariously on her high heels, couldn't compensate. She went down hard, her legs tangling beneath her. She hit the polished floor with a sickening thud, her purse spilling its contents across the atrium, cheap lipstick, breathless mints, and a stack of declined credit cards. The lobby gasped. But no one moved to help. The modern reflex took over. I watched on the monitor as a dozen smartphones rose in unison. The bystanders weren't calling the police. They were opening TikTok and Instagram. They were filming. Brad looked down at her, sneering at the woman he had promised to take to Paris. "You look exactly like what you are," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "Trash." He turned and stormed toward the revolving doors, pushing through them and disappearing into the street, running from a debt he could never pay. Jasmine sat on the cold floor of the Meridian Tower. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, mascara running in black rivers down her chin. She saw the circle of people standing around her. She saw the red recording lights of the phones. She had spent her entire life desperate to be famous. She had wanted the world to look at her. Now, as the camera zoomed in on her humiliation, she finally got her wish. She was viral. The fallout reached my parents exactly 2 hours after security threw Brad onto the pavement. I was back in my office signing the final termination papers for the Vision Flow file when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I stared at the screen for a long moment, watching the name flash. There was a time when this call would have made me anxious, a time when I would have rehearsed apologies for things I hadn't done. That time was dead. I swiped answer and put the phone on speaker, placing it on the obsidian desk that had just served as Brad's execution block. Naya, my mother, screamed, her voice shrill and vibrating with hysteria. "What is wrong with you? We just saw the video. Jasmine is hysterical. Brad is missing. People are laughing at us. Nia, the whole church is talking." "How could you be so cruel?" I didn't interrupt. I let her vent the poison. "And then your father tells me you are the boss." She continued, her voice cracking. "You run that company. You have millions of dollars, and you let us live like this. You let us struggle while you sit in a high tower. You watched us worry about bills, and you said nothing. You are a snake, Nia. You are wicked. You set Brad up just to humiliate him because you are jealous of your sister's happiness." The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, faced with the revelation that Brad was a fraud and I was their savior, they chose to victimize themselves. They were angry not because I lied, but because my success made their judgment look flawed. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice flat. "No, I am not finished." My father's voice boomed from the background. "You owe us an explanation, girl. You owe us an apology. You have money. Fine. Then you should have been taking care of your family instead of playing games." I leaned back in my chair. "You are right, Dad. I should talk about taking care of the family. Let's talk about the house." The line went quiet for a second. "What about the house?" he demanded. "I am looking at a document right now," I said, picking up the property title transfer I had expedited that morning. "It seems that 3 months ago, Brad convinced you to sign some papers. He told you it was a temporary liquidity authorization for his startup. He told you it was just a formality to show asset strength to investors." I heard my mother gasp. "How do you know that?" He said it was secret. "It wasn't a formality, Mom," I said, delivering the news with clinical precision. "It was a second mortgage. He used your home equity as collateral for a high-interest business loan from a predatory lender. He maxed it out. And because he hasn't made a payment in 90 days, the lender initiated foreclosure proceedings last week." "No," my father whispered. "No. He wouldn't. He said it was safe." "He lied," I said. "You signed the deed over to a shell company.
You have been living in a foreclosed home for 6 days. You just didn't open the mail. I let the silence stretch. I could hear my mother sobbing. They were realizing that their golden boy had not only failed them, but had left them homeless. But don't worry, I continued, my voice devoid of comfort. I intervened.
When the foreclosure notice hit the public registry this morning, my legal team flagged it. I bought the debt. I paid off the lender in full an hour ago. You paid it? My mother asked, hope creeping back into her voice. Oh, thank God. Thank you, Nia. I knew you were a good girl deep down. Don't misunderstand me. I cut her off. I didn't pay it as a gift. I bought the asset. The bank doesn't own the house anymore, and neither do you. I do. The line went dead silent again. I am the landlord now, I said. You can stay there. I won't evict you. But the locks are being changed tomorrow, and you will sign a lease agreement, and the next time you feel like calling me a snake or a disgrace, remember whose roof is over your head. I hung up. I didn't wait for their response. I had acquired the company, destroyed the threat, and secured the real estate. It was a productive Monday. The city of Atlanta sprawled out beneath me like a circuit board of gold and obsidian. From the terrace of my penthouse, the noise of the streets was nothing more than a distant, insignificant hum. I stood at the railing, the wind playing with the silk of my robe, holding a glass of vintage Pinot Noir that cost more than the engagement ring Brad had tried to buy on credit. It was quiet here. It was the silence of absolute control. The war was over and the dust had settled exactly where I had arranged for it to fall. My legal team had sent the lease agreement to my parents this afternoon via courier. It was a standard binding residential contract. I allowed them to stay in the house not out of sentimentality, but because eviction proceedings are public and messy, and I prefer efficiency. However, the era of invisible subsidies is over. I canceled the secret trust that had been paying their medical premiums for 3 years. I stopped the anonymous auto payments to their utility providers. They are finally going to experience the dignity of paying their own way, a value they always claimed to cherish but never actually practiced. They wanted a landlord to respect. Now they have one. If the rent is late, they will receive a notice. It is strictly business. As for Jasmine, the viral video of her tantrum in the lobby did exactly what she always wanted. It made her famous. Millions of people have seen her crying on the floor, surrounded by the spilled contents of her fake life. She has become a global meme for entitlement. No luxury brand will touch her. Her influencer career is dead on arrival. I received a notification today from a contact at a staffing agency. Jasmine picked up a shift at a diner on the outskirts of town. She is finally wearing an apron, not as a costume for a photo shoot, but as a uniform. She is learning that respect is earned through labor, not posted for likes. She is serving tables just as she once tried to make me serve her. And Brad, he is currently in custody, unable to make bail. The forensic audit I handed over to the authorities was comprehensive. He is facing multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. He wanted to be a man of consequence. He wanted to be in the system. Now he is. I took a slow sip of the wine. It tasted like justice. For years, they treated me like a ghost in my own family. They mistook my silence for weakness and my privacy for failure. They worshipped a liar because he sold them a fantasy, and they crucified the truth because it came wrapped in humility. They underestimated the quiet sister. They didn't realize that while they were making noise, I was making moves. I looked out at the skyline, my reflection staring back at me in the glass of the balcony door. I didn't see a victim. I saw the architect of my own life. They wanted a fairy tale ending where the prince saves the day and everyone lives in a mansion they didn't earn. I couldn't give them that. The market doesn't support fairy tales. Instead, I gave them a masterclass in economics. I taught them about assets and liabilities. I kept the assets. I liquidated the liabilities, and now I am the only one left with equity. I raised my glass to the empty sky, a toast to the silence. True power never needs to shout. While Brad and Jasmine were consumed by the shallow illusion of success, chasing status logos and external validation, Nia proved that real wealth and influence are built in silence. This story serves as a stark reminder never to mistake humility for incompetence or kindness for weakness. The loudest person in the room is often the most insecure, while the quietest holds the leverage. Substance always outlasts performance. In the end, reality checks are the only currency that matters, and arrogance is a debt that always comes due with heavy interest. Have you ever been underestimated by people who didn't know your true worth? Share your story in the comments below.